with the international business sector, and we complied with the requirements we had to meet of the OECD. As you know, we converged our tax rate to a scale of 5.5% at the top to 1% at the bottom for all companies doing business in Barbados. We therefore simplified our position in relation to our tax system, and in achieving that, we had to deploy a lot of manpower and economic resources to get that right. We abolished ring fencing. We also enacted what is referred to as substance legislation, and by and large, we did everything to ensure that we met the highest possible standards that were set by the OECD. And I really believe that this fact needs to be touted significantly, because it is a very important feat to have achieved given the time period that we had. I do believe, in fact, if I may say this, Madam Chair, that the media should have been carrying this, given this far more publicity than it did, but unfortunately it didn't. We now have, Madam Chair, to go on to promote this new product that we have to put in, that has been put in the marketplace. And in fact, we have started that process. We have been going abroad, trade shows, road shows. I myself will be leaving the island next week to lead a delegation in Canada to promote the new product. I did one also recently in New York as well. So we have to I don't want to use the word sell, but we have pretty much to market this new product that we have. The International Business Unit will continue to expand our Barbados tax treaty network. At present, we have some 37 double taxation agreements in force, 5 tax information exchange agreements, 9 bilateral investment treaties. And of course, you know that the more of these tax treaties that you have in place with countries, the more attractive you are for investors. Of course, we can go into greater detail in the question and answer section as we proceed today to expand on what I've said so far. In terms of the industry arm of the ministry, the major commitment of the ministry during the coming financial year, 2019 to 2020, will be the preparation of a national industrial policy to cover the period 2020 to 2055. This is really long overdue. One was done by the current Prime Minister some years ago, around 2002, I think it was, 2007. And obviously that needs to be, we are going to take that into account as the new plan is being prepared, but obviously it has to be updated. Our manufacturing sector, Madam Chair, is performing way below optimum levels, and we have to do better. We're down in our manufacturing sector, whether it is in terms of the number of manufacturing companies, or the number of people employed, or the contribution of the sector to our gross domestic product. We are down. Yes, some things are happening, particularly at BIDC, in terms of the policies that they're executing, but really and truly, we have to pause now, sit down and take stock of where we are with our manufacturing sector, and devise a policy and a vision to ensure we can take the sector forward so that we can generate employment, earn foreign exchange, and ultimately alleviate poverty in the country. Madam Chair, it's a very serious thing. And we will go into greater detail on that plan, I'm sure, in the question and answer. That leaves basically the work of the BIDC, which, as I said, we will come to as well in our presentation on their individual programs, because the BIDC is also actively involved in the promotion and facilitation of business development, particularly in relation to manufacturing, and perhaps even more particularly in relation to the export sector in Barbados. So we are going to give some details as we proceed in the question and answer section. I know that we have a 10-minute limitation, that's why I'm somewhat rushing. And that leaves, therefore, Madam Chair, the CAIPO, our corporate registry, Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Registry, which, of course, you know, it maintains a reliable system of public records and an efficient registry service to support commercial activity in Barbados. If you look at the figure in the estimates, you will see that there is in fact a cut to the vote for that sub-program, representing the sums to be allocated to KIPO. And that's because discussions are going on to ensure, because KIPO finds itself really as one of the epicenters of business development of the country. And therefore, efficiency is at the core, must be at the core of how they proceed. And they have the challenges. They have a large number of pieces of legislation to administer. And they have been one of the departments in the ministry that were affected. They were already short-staffed from before. And they were one of the departments that were affected by the recent cuts, government cuts in employment. And that made things a bit more challenging for them. However, it is recognized that more needs to be done, that some work needs to be done to make them even more efficient than they are. And therefore, certain options are being pursued to make KIPO less dependent on government for financial assistance. And I know that a certain entity is currently working closely with the corporate registry, getting information to make a proposal to the government to ensure that we can, in fact, have a new structure in place for KIPO as it goes forward. But I prefer to stop there now and entertain any questions that may be asked.
Thank you. Any remarks by Honorable Leader of the Opposition?
Thank you, ma'am. And good afternoon to Minister and to his team. I certainly welcome them. I would have to confess honestly that they appear to be the least relaxed of the groups that have come here. And I suspect it's because they're the most hardworking. And I welcome the opportunity to interact with the minister, who is very hardworking, I'm sure, and themselves. Just a few brief remarks. I want to compliment the team and the minister, of course. He's done this more than once. With reference to the discipline and diligence he's brought to leadership of this ministry, with respect especially to the bringing of legislation, the passage of legislation in this chamber, important legislation, and in a very, very short time. That must have been the product of hard work, long days, and late nights, and I compliment him and them for that. However, it cannot be left to be the legacy of the minister or his team that he brought us into the good books of the OECD or EU or any such international institution or entity. Legacy must go beyond that. And I look forward during the interaction this afternoon of hearing about a few very important things which I think if they are accomplished, that legacy would have been well served in terms of being established. I think, and the minister intimated that in his opening remarks, the opportunity is there, and indeed the obligation is there to reset the platform for manufacturing in Barbados. He described it and its state of health in terms which perhaps make me even a bit more foreboding of the situation, but based on their record, I'm optimistic that they can bring about over time the change, and we hope to hear that reflected in what they say to us today and how these estimates will serve in the effort towards resetting that platform for manufacturing in Barbados. Much of our quality of life today, much of what we have experienced in the last several years prior to the last administration in terms of economic advancement and the building out of our economy resulted from the input of the international business sector in terms of revenue to that economy. We've lost a lot on that. Some may suggest it's the delinquents of the last government or lack of diligence. Some would suggest it's changes on the North American side of things, Canada in particularly so. Some would suggest other reasons as to why we have lost market share, so to speak, and have lost out on a lot of revenue which that sector generated for us. But again, the opportunity and the obligation are laid at the doorsteps of this minister and his team to restore international business fortunes. I look forward to hearing during the interaction this afternoon from the figures how we propose to make the initial steps under his leadership to get there. I believe that the ministry would understand the importance of further creating a platform with reference to technology. It's very much a part of the way of life in the world today. When it comes to international business sector, it's extremely important, and there are areas with respect to the input and the contribution of technology as one of the drivers to the sector that we have yet to fully embrace and to explore. And we've talked about some of those things in this parliament recently. I look forward to hearing about that effort to further build a technology culture within the culture of doing international business and pursuing industry efforts in Barbados. I believe that we need to find our niche space as a small developing economy in the global space, the global market space. We have been fully persuaded, and that for some time, that for us to really take off in this new era, we have got to look beyond our narrow shores, we've got to look beyond the region, and as we look to the global space, we've got to be competitive because we've lost a lot of the preferential accesses and stuff that we have had in the past. So I look forward to us hearing about those attempts to find that niche space in the global trading and global business environment. And then, of course, the last thing perhaps I'd mention at the outset is that to which the minister referred, and I look forward to hearing about this national industrial policy and the features which will be prominent in the outlay of that and how they will be rolled out. I thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. The House is now open for questions. Honorable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I too want to join with thanking the Minister and his team for the hard work that we recognize that they've been doing in navigating some pretty perilous waters at times, and I think they ought to be complimented for the job that they have done. I'm assuming that the entire team that I can see have been working hard. We've been seeing the ones mostly from the international business sector, but I believe the entire team is a hard-working team. The question I have speaks to the same matter of international business, and I know that industry and industrial development is part of the mandate of this ministry. I'm wondering how, as it relates to domestic businesses, what is the impact on domestic businesses as they try to focus on exporting and earning foreign exchange for our country? What is the impact of these new trading rules, well, new and it seems developing trading rules and trading arrangements? I see treaty negotiations at Program 040, Sub-Program 494. I'm just wondering what impact these new arrangements and these developing arrangements are having on domestic businesses, as in businesses owned by Barbadians or CARICOM nationals, as they seek to navigate this new and developing arena that is taking place before us.
I'll let the Director of International Business answer that at this stage.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. Thanks to the...
Just to introduce yourself, everyone who's going to speak, and your post.
Thank you, ma'am. My name is Kevin Hunt, Director of International Business. Thank you for the guidance. Thank you for the Honourable Member of St. Peter for his question. As it relates to the impact of the new measures on domestic businesses, we are now in the period of time where we now have to wait to actually measure that. What I will say is that the convergence of the tax rates from where they once stood 25/30% now to 5.5% and 1% at the lowest end now provides an opportunity for local businesses to be able to reinvest monies which they would have previously had to pay in taxes in their business. This is where closer development between the Ministry of International Business and the Ministry of Commerce and Small Business Development will now have to take place, where we need to roll out a national action plan as it relates to education of our domestic business market and encouraging them now not just to take advantage of the increased revenue from a personal point of view, but look to redeploy those monies by way of training, by way of IT development, by way of investment in their personnel, which would include, hopefully, increasing emoluments for their staff. So that now has to be done, given the short time that we would have only now enacted the new changes in legislation.
Any supplementary?
A follow-up question. The director's response focused in my mind on local businesses, locally owned businesses, developing, retooling, reinvesting. What I want to find out really would be what impact does the international trading system and the international trading rules, what impact do those rules have on locally owned businesses? Are there hindrances to local businesses getting their products in the international market? Are there situations where there are no new facilities that allow them to benefit and get their products onto the international market? The focus I want is the impact on these new trading arrangements on locally owned businesses.
Comment on that question is Sandra Chapman, Mrs.
Madam Chair, good evening. My name is Sandra Trotman. I'm the CEO of the Barbados Investment and Development Corporation. At the BIDC, our work involved working with the companies on the ground to assist them to not only access the markets, but to understand the agreements and what they can offer. Frequently, the issue arises where companies may not be totally ready to provide the amount demanded. And it is not that they're not producing good products, and some of them are producing to the standards required, but there are greater opportunities available. At this point, I cannot say that there are major hindrances. Sometimes there are non-tariff barriers that are faced market by market, but on a global, when you take the global scene collectively, we believe that the issue with access largely lies on the side of being able to produce and supply the products as demanded.
Follow-up question would be, and this is a question that people in St. Peter and other places would be asking, based on what they keep hearing in the news about Brexit, and given our long ties with the United Kingdom, the question that people in St. Peter have is, what does all of this mean? Brexit and EU and all this stuff that they're hearing about that they may not be able to wrap their heads around. What does that mean, or what are the possibilities, what are the impacts, possible impacts for Barbados in terms of our trading arrangements with the UK and with the EU?
With reference to the companies that supply the UK, sorry, Madam Chair, with reference to the companies that supply the UK, we have had initial discussions with the British, and we've had some level of assurance that the kind of benefits that were offered under the EU, they should not differ significantly, if at all. The concern comes in being able to frequently, constantly communicate to the clients as they operate and to make available to them the information that will help them to allay any fears they may have as we enter new markets. And the UK with Brexit will be no different. But at this stage, there's not a lot of concern within the sector because of what have been communicated in terms of the UK seeking to ensure that companies will not be disadvantaged.
Okay.
Thank you. Honourable Member St. Michael West Central.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you too to the Honourable Member St. Michael North. Let me first of all congratulate you and your team for what I once described, I believe, as the debate of December 11th, 2018, when you introduced several pieces of legislation to this honourable chamber. As I referred to it then, it was a lot of heavy lifting that you carried on that occasion. And oftentimes, I'm sure that you would have received the compliments from your constituents in St. Michael North, as I received from those who heard you in the presentation as we share political borders. So I really want to commend you and your team for piloting those amendments, including the amendments to the Business Companies Act. Now, I know that the international business sector is a sector that the Barbados Labour Party, I can almost say the brainchild, actually, of the Barbados Labour Party, going back to those days of former Prime Minister James G. Adams and the late Sir Harold Bernard St. John, who served in this chamber and who would have done a lot of work in this sector. Barbados has always been perceived as a low-tax destination. I know that we've had a lot of challenges, and you've had to deal with some of those challenges since you became minister. But I would like to find out from you, since we are offering what I believe to be a competitive, very good tax rate out there, what steps have your ministry taken in respect of ensuring that the slide that we would have witnessed in 2008, 2009 earnings, what steps are you taking or your ministry taking to regain some of the lost business from this sector? And then I'll have a follow-up question.
Start the response. I heard the member for the Honourable Opposition Leader make the point about we shouldn't judge ourselves in terms of compliance with OECD and so on. But, yes, hear me no better? Yes, I heard the Honourable Opposition Leader making the point that we shouldn't judge our success by whether or not we satisfy the requirements of the OECD, but unfortunately the rules of the game indicate that we have to do that. It is important that we comply with globally set standards by the world body responsible for the setting of those standards. And we have been able to do that. Now, having met those requirements, we have to ensure that we now maintain very, very high standards. And tied into that is the issue of maintaining reputation. Good reputation will itself attract investors. And it is our intention to do that. One of the things that we did as part of recognizing that responsibility is that having a low tax jurisdiction tends to bring the suspicion that you might be luring companies to your shores by virtue of having those low taxes, full stop. But one of the requirements that have been put in place to counter that is a requirement that you enact what is called substance legislation, which is to ensure that you have companies coming and operating within your territory whose core income generating activities are in fact taking place within your territory. So shelf companies and so on would not be would be a thing of the past. If I may use an IP example, intellectual property. You may have an entity that has all of its research and development going on in Italy, China, or wherever. Then it decides to set up a company in, say, Barbados, just for the purpose of receiving the royalties and deciding to benefit thereby by the low tax rate of Barbados. Now, we have decided by enacting our substance legislation that no, that cannot be. If you want to claim the tax benefit of your operations in Barbados, of your revenue generation in Barbados, you must in fact also bring along with that substance, which means that you must have your core income generating activities as well in Barbados, so that your research and development that generate those royalties would in fact have to take place in Barbados as well. So we focus on reputation and compliance with the highest possible standards.
Thank you, Minister. I know with, as a case, whenever there's a new policy initiative, and certainly with tax conversion, I agree with you that businesses of substance, what obviously we learned here, and I think in particular because Barbados has the benefit of its geographic location in respect of other entities, I'm sure that there are entities within the region who probably find Barbados a more attractive place to do business because of its stability and on-site services. But with all the work that you would have undertaken, and your ministry, that is, would have undertaken, do you intend to, or have you done any road shows to try to drum up some additional business to Barbados? Because I recognize that this is a sector that struggled, like I said, going back to 2008, 2009, there was a little bit of a slide. So I'm not sure, because sometimes it's important that we explain to the constituents of St. Michael West Section, and I think the opportunity to explain to your constituents as well, the sort of heavy lifting that you've been carrying this ministry. So I would perhaps want you to probably tell us if you've had the opportunity to do any road shows, and or if that's a plan in your ministry, and how you intend to drum up additional business so that it would redound to the benefit of our constituents.
Yes, in fact, only in January, I did one such road show in New York. And as I said earlier, next week I'm off to Toronto as well to do a road show. I know that there's a program planned as well in London, or being put together in London as well for, is it May? April as well. So yes, we are very conscious. The thing is that there was a bit of a lull last year as we were transitioning. And the comment was made that perhaps Barbados was not sufficiently out there in the marketplace. And that was sort of natural, because you weren't, as you transition, you're not sure what to sell, what to market. You have to wait until you finalize. So over the course of a number of months, it was commented that Barbados was not sufficiently in the face of interested investors out there. But certainly since we were able to finalize our new tax structure in December, from January we've hit the ground running, and running pretty hard, if I may say. Because going to temperatures of 8 and 9 degrees is not something you welcome doing, unless you are committed.
And Minister, my last follow-up question, and based on your experiences thus far, would you say that, and since the change of government, would you say that there's a renewed confidence, or there's a lot of new opportunities pending? You may not want to go into details, but I would just perhaps wish if you could just give us a hint as to what is your experiences in the international marketplace.
Yeah, so I think that from pretty early after December, the international market tended to know what Barbados was doing. It's obviously a bit too early to tell what exactly will come out of it, but certainly during my interfacing with the interested or the stakeholder partners we have overseas. And remember, when we go to road shows, we actually interface by and large with those we have to import to sell the product. So you will interface with your international tax planners, your accountants, your lawyers, the big accounting firms and so on. Those are the ones you have to go to, and they have been very, very receptive, and I'm very impressed with our product. I think they think it's a very, very good product. It certainly has brought a lot of certainty in their minds as to what they have to do. It's been simplified. You no longer have to go chasing each individual piece of legislation to know what rate of taxation would apply to you. It's all there now in pretty much one piece of legislation. We've converged at a certain rate, except for the insurance sector. And it's all there pretty much in one place. It's very, very simplified now for people, and they're very comfortable and confident, I'd say. And the response has been very, very good. Our aim was to meet, and I keep saying this, our aim was to meet the requirements and the standards of the internationally recognized standard setting body in relation to international taxation, which was the OECD. And we have met that. So we were very confident in selling our product and our marketing our product, that really and truly we've met the highest possible standards.
Honorable Member for St. John.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, you mentioned in your opening remarks that manufacturing is down. And I'm curious because only, I think, maybe this week or last week, the Honorable Member for St. Peter did a tour to one of our manufacturing companies, and they indicated that it was a major problem in getting business as it relates to some of the major construction that is currently going on the island. My first question is it necessary for us now to legislate under the new Town Planning Act that maybe planning obligations mandate that some of these companies look to local manufacturers to supply, whether it's window or furniture?
Madam Chair, with reference to manufacturing, over the years we've seen a decrease in terms of the type of companies we've had in the sector. Say 10 years ago, we would have had some larger companies producing lots of products in terms of bulk export. Now we find that we have smaller companies. We still have some of the larger ones producing at a very high standard and satisfying markets overseas. Sorry, Madam Chair, the question related to whether we should legislate the local suppliers. I believe that previously there was a situation, I'm not sure if it was legislated, where I think it was 40% hotels and operations of that nature were supposed to look to the local supplier. And I remember that was an arrangement which was negotiating consultation with the BMA. But some companies, or producers, or persons involved in construction may require a type of product that is not available in Barbados. What probably needs to be looked at is that local operators, whether in the construction sector, hotel, restaurant, should be required to use some of the local produce from the manufacturing sector. While it may not be furniture, or it may not be bed sheets, it may be the pepper sauce, seasonings, and products of that nature. So there is an avenue where we can make recommendations to have that matter addressed in that way. But to implement a policy of that nature, you would have to obviously review the sector in its entirety to ensure that what is being demanded is available locally.
As well. I have a number of old plantation houses in the constituency of St. John. And what input can the ministry provide, or how can persons who are interested in manufacturing, maybe developing a cottage industry, you just mentioned pepper sauce and stuff like that, what can the ministry do to assist with the promotion of maybe starting those type of manufacturing sectors at the rural level?
That's it, Madam Chair. That certainly is the role of the BIDC. that is what we do daily. We meet one-on-one with clients, and we help them in terms of formulating their businesses. We are involved in assisting with their design, whether it be product, corporate identity. We facilitate with the assistance of the BNSI in terms of their quality. We provide training daily where we will speak to many issues pertaining to the management of a business, even with the food sector for persons in the condiment sector. We're frequently running courses on good manufacturing practices. We also provide training as it relates to preparing for a trade show, whether it be BMEX or one of the international shows. So the whole role and the work of the BIDC is wrapped up in preparing manufacturers, businesses to reach the international market. All companies will not target international market, but it is our goal to ensure that they understand what the international market requires, and as a result, produce at that standard.
Thank you. Honorable Member for St. Joseph.
Madam Chair, I raised with the Minister the issue of the constant changing of the goalposts that we as a small jurisdiction experience. The Minister is well aware that we are fighting with the EU on matters related to our tax regime. We're also fighting with the EU on matters relating to our Financial Action Task Force obligations. I note from your estimates that your vote under professional services is actually modest and certainly less than last year. I'm wondering if the Minister has a view as to the need for Barbados to do any lobbying in the various capitals. Certainly from my perspective, while we have embassies and high commissions in capitals abroad, we are likely to need specialized skills to lobby the political leaders. The Minister would no doubt be aware that a lot of the decisions are being made by the technical people with very little reference to the political leadership. So I'm just wondering if the Minister is of the view that the amounts which are estimated for professional votes, professional services, which in every case appears to be either even or down, would be adequate to fulfill this new demand.
Before I turn over to the director, I just want to say that the ministry does have, as part of its artillery, for want of a better way of putting it, a special advisor, as you may be aware. In fact, through the entire process of amending our legislation last year, the ministry had the benefit of, I have to say, internationally renowned Ben Arundel, who was legendary in the area of international business. I actually saw that when I was with him in New York last month, well, in January, where, in fact, everyone with whom we interface knew him on a first-name basis, and he knew them on a first-name basis as well. And he has been working with us very, very closely, so that when there are any obstacles we see up ahead, we're able to contact him immediately, and he's been able to give the ministry advice on demand. So I don't know if that is the sort of answer you wanted. We do have advisory and professional services within the ministry, practically on a full-time basis.
As to the adequacy of the amount, the estimates for 2019 to 2020 reflect professional services of only $22,800.
Yes, well, actually,
while last year's revised estimates was $198,700. Now, while your existing special advisor will no doubt be able to advise the government of Barbados. I don't know that he's going to be able to lobby Liechtenstein or Switzerland or any of those major players in the EU.
Well, first of all, his actual, the vote to cover him actually is from the Ministry of Finance. But yes, we do have, he is able to go overseas as needed. In fact, we also did a tour of Europe fairly recently last week, and he was also there. But we do also rely very heavily on our network of ambassadors overseas to do a lot of lobbying on our behalf. Only recently we in fact enlisted the support of all of the ambassadors through Europe to do some fairly significant work on our behalf. So I don't think we are short on professional skills and diplomatic skills in the marketplace to lobby on our behalf.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, ma'am. We recently passed in the House a measure that gave some significant adjustments to the level and rates of corporation taxes. And looking at the revenues projected on this year, with reference to corporation taxes, it's showing an increase, ma'am, of $124 million. Now, increased taxes usually relate to revenue derived from taxes, usually relates to profits on those taxes. I'm wondering if in a context where you're dealing with a one-year period, you just adjusted those tax rates such that you lose a lot of revenue potentially on the domestic side. You are yet, therefore, to see what will happen on the non-domestic front in terms of business generating, companies generating revenue for our tax coffers. Is it reasonable to project a $124 million increase in that particular context where you've adjusted the tax rates on the local front and where you're uncertain as to how the overseas companies will respond? I would like to hear a response on that. I see at the same time, ma'am, we're projecting a $33 million decrease in taxes relative to international trade.
Well, I can only answer that question by way of saying that really that analysis does not really fall within the purview of this ministry.
Doesn't?
But I would say that the projection in terms of overall revenue, you're speaking of overall revenue increase?
Revenue listed here in the estimates of revenue and expended for this year to be realized through corporation taxes. It's $124 million more than last year in a context where you've had those adjustments and there's therefore a level of uncertainty. In a context where taxes or revenue, tax revenue derived from corporations relate to their profit margins. I'm just wondering if it is reasonable to project that type of increase. I see it here in the estimates of revenue, corporation taxes. Profits. Taxes on incomes and profits. And there's a $33 million decrease for taxes relative to international trade.
I think that the director wishes to make a statement, but before he answers, I will just indicate to you that, as I said, that analysis doesn't really fall from this ministry, but I can also assure you that I was aware of some serious analysis that was going on as we were, in fact, reviewing our tax structure to come to the conclusion that we came. And in fact, the tax experts employed by the government to work in this matter, they crunched the numbers and they're the ones that came up with that figure. So as I said, it doesn't really fall within our purview, but I believe the director may wish to say something a bit more specific.
Through you, Madam Chair, the only thing I would add is that there must be the realization that with the adjustment of the new tax rates, the tax for the foreign-owned entities, formerly referred to as the international businesses, would have also increased. because previously the lowest base rate they would have had would have been 0.25%. The lowest base rate has now gone up to 1%. And so there will be that projection that you would attract increase in corporate tax from that sector, coupled with the fact that to date we have not had any indication of any loss or major loss of businesses as a result of our adjustment of the tax rates going upward. In fact, what happened prior to bringing the legislation into the House, a lot of groundwork was done, contacting the major corporate players to ensure that they're willing to continue to partner with Barbados as we go through this difficult time and to indeed remain here. And they have indeed chosen to remain and stick it out with us. We also will see that at this point in time, there will be corporate tax revenue gained by what is known as hybrid companies coming out of the UK. And I am told that this coming tax year, we are to see an increase as they now begin to really roll in and pay their corporate tax. So I believe, based on what the Honourable Minister Toppin has shared, along with those few insights, I think taken together, those would have been some of the factors that fed into that projection.
I hear and accept that, ma'am. What about the $33 million decrease in taxes on international trade? Decrease.
Again, those are matters that don't fall to be determined by this ministry, as you are well aware.
No.
We don't do those analysis or projections. Perhaps the honourable member for Christchurch.
Honourable member for Christchurch East Central.
East Central.
No, ma'am, if it doesn't properly fall to this ministry to talk to us about taxes, I'm prepared to wait and hear from the Ministry of Finance.
Right, I was just going to remind the honourable member that the head to which he refers isn't properly before the House at the moment.
I'm not hearing what's being said.
Honourable member for he is reminding you of the head that we are discussing at this moment. Honourable member for Christchurch West. We're going around a circle. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just wanted to ask the minister, because we heard over the last administration ad nauseum that downgrades did not matter. And have you found in your ministry that the downgrades of our sovereign debt rating have had an effect on what were the international businesses and their registration?
Every rating, negative rating, affects a country's reputation. And yes, it is pretty clear that, and the results are there, that as the negative downgrades were coming in, yes, investors were shying away. What I can say happily is that since the change of government, there have been two upgrades. And in fact, investors tend to follow these things very, very closely, because on each occasion when I traveled on the road shows, that it was pointed out to us that by the persons whom we were addressing, that they were very pleased to see that in more recent times, the country seems to be on the mend, and that they were now feeling a lot more comfortable with interacting with Barbados, and were more seriously considering recommencing investment in Barbados or making new investments into Barbados as a result of the upgrades.
Why I'm said that is, I was extremely concerned when we saw two what were essentially indigenous companies. A company that was called Barbados Mutual for hundreds, I guess it was over 100 years it was in Barbados, changed its name to Sagicor. And due to a downgrade, and a sovereign downgrade, because we were told that a company cannot have a credit rating higher than its country. And if the sovereign credit rating of Barbados was so low, this was one of the reasons that they moved, I believe, to Bermuda. And then we saw a second company in Seoul move to, I believe, Cayman. That itself would have been upsetting. But what was worse was when those companies then sold parts of their portfolio. Someone, I think Sol sold 75% of its portfolio to a Canadian company, and Sagicor either sold or is about to sell a significant part of its portfolio. Barbados then, by virtue of having had downgrades, lost what would be significant, and I'm talking about millions and millions of dollars, in what would have been a property transfer tax when those companies sold. And instead of that property transfer tax properly coming to Barbados for Barbadian companies, I suspect that other jurisdictions were able to benefit from that. So I guess that's a long-winded way to ask, does your ministry have an active program to re-attract companies to Barbados who would have left because of the downgrades? And if so, what is that program?
That's, sorry, Madam Chair, good afternoon again. That's a question that is properly funneled through Invest Barbados, which has the responsibility for marketing. What I would say, though, from our end, in terms of international business, not only would we support and encourage, and I'm sure given the meetings that we had, and PS, who sits on that board, PS Foster, I'm sure she can add anything else on that matter. What we can say is that we not only intend on going after business that we would have lost, but also tapping into new markets. Markets in Africa in particular that have been identified by the Honorable Prime Minister. And so there is a comprehensive plan to indeed go after those markets, including lost business. But I must say, though, that while we are working towards getting that plan in place, we are still very much in the stage of, if I can use the phrase, settling after all of the changes that we would have gone through, because there's still a number of procedural elements that we are still working on to ensure that everything is seamless and smooth within the Barbadian market first. So we're concentrating on making sure that everything is settled at home. Yes, we've commenced road shows. Yes, Invest Barbados, I know that Invest Barbados has had strategic planning meetings. That was in January, PS? In January as well, with the help of a consultant. So I know those plans are in place, but from our side, in terms of international business, we are still working very much on making sure that we are settled as at home as possible, so when those businesses come, they're coming to a very healthy and seamless environment.
Okay. Supplementary?
Yeah, just one final supplemental is, you know, we always hear about the doing business and how the ease of doing business. And I don't know if you all look at that doing business rate and how you all are able to assess and improve Barbados's rate of doing business so that we can make it even more attractive to foreign investors.
Yes, well, it is very clear that a tax rate alone will not guarantee the attraction of business to Barbados. And I want to commend the other ministries that have actually recognized this and have therefore done quite a lot of work recently to generally deal with the issue of the ease of doing business in Barbados. And in particular, we've had the reform in the area of immigration by the member for St. James North, which is one of the things that would appeal to an interested investor, how problematic is the issue of immigration. Town and country planning, recently there were some significant reforms in that area as well, and there were some others as well. Sorry? Yes, the Ministry of Information is doing a full suite on relation to information technology to make the doing of business by government even more attractive and efficient, and all these things influence and interested. All these things influence an interested investor. So yes, it is pretty clear. I'm not going to claim the benefit in this ministry for those things I just mentioned, but it was a government interministerial approach to ensure that the ease of doing business was addressed and to make Barbados a more attractive jurisdiction for an investor, because I have said expressly on many occasions, merely a tax rate alone will not, in fact, generate the coming of new business to Barbados.
Honorable Member for St. John. You're speaking? Sorry, St. Philip West. My bad. I was thinking John.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hunt, you mentioned that there's now an emphasis on looking to the African continent for business. Could you in any way expand on what it is that you will be undertaking? Because this is an area that has been a source of concern for myself for a very long time, in that whenever we speak of international business, it appears that we speak primarily of North America or Europe. And before us is a large landmass of huge opportunities. So that is my first question. And then my second question, if I can pose it at the same time. You've also, by admission, said that there's manufacturing is down, which means that there would be a number of buildings under your purview that would be empty. And I have a number of sporting organizations who continue to ask me day in and day out about BIDC buildings that in some cases, like in Newton, for instance, that look derelict. If there's a possibility that people can get a hold of these buildings and refurbish them and this sort of thing, can you speak to that so that at least those persons listening would have some idea of what the possibilities are?
Let the director answer part A, and then we'll take part B in a different one.
Thank you very much for the question. The first thing that needed to happen happened, which is, as you quite rightly mentioned, the realization that we needed to move from just focusing on Canada and North America. And that, I believe, has really been driven by our Prime Minister, as well as the Board of Invest Barbados. Right now, the study is being done because, as you quite rightly mentioned, Africa is a vast area to look at in terms of investment. And so we don't want to go in with a shotgun approach where we're scattering all over the place, but we prefer to use a more sniper approach. And that's why the study is being done, so that we can ascertain exactly which African countries that we want to target, what businesses we want to attract out of that particular market as well. And I'll turn over to my colleague.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening again. I'm really happy to be able to speak to that, because from the queries we keep getting in our office, there's some misconception that the BIDC's buildings are vacant. We have 86% occupancy at the BIDC. We only have 4%, which is unlettable space, and one of those buildings relate to the same building the Honourable Minister was speaking to, the one in Newton. We have a building in Grisette, which is like that, and then we have, there's a building in Wildy, which is unlettable and therefore empty. The 11% that is available but but empty is because it is located mainly in the harbour, where buildings were created for call centers and data entry companies, and we always have to keep some available because some companies do expand rapidly, but there is no large amount of space available. And we've been getting several queries recently, and also queries from persons who wanted to use the space for free. And that's another matter that concerns us at the BIDC, because we're not provided with a grant, with a subvention to maintain the property, so we must collect rents for the space. So we are willing to work with clients who are prepared to join us in a joint venture to bring the unlettable space back into operation, because, as you would appreciate, we do not have the funds to do that. But we do not have a space that is available, warehouses, It just is not there. Our space, the buildings may not look in the best condition, but persons are occupying them.
And the tenants, this is for me, you find that the rent is being paid properly, or is that in a big arrears?
At present on our books, we have a raise of about 4.6 million. We believe that about 4.1 is collectible, but of course, for accounting purposes, there are some which are not on the books, which we're still going after. At present, we have 43 companies. We're focusing on them for eviction. As we speak, there are 10 companies that should be receiving notices to quit, because we have found that several of the long-standing clients, and some of them, especially in Pelican Industrial Estate, they're not paying. And Pelican is the biggest drain on the BIDC. We lose about $1 million each year maintaining Pelican, because the rents are very small, because traditionally it was created for small businesses. But if we have these small businesses and they're not paying their rents, then we have a problem. And that is our major area of concern. But as it relates to the maintenance of the buildings, I hope the minister doesn't mind that I would really use this opportunity to speak to the fact that we need some funds to maintain the buildings, because what we're doing is rolling over the rents. So the 10 million we get in subvention used to pay the staff at the BIDC and to run our promotion and business development program. The 10 million we anticipate that we will collect in rents, we have to roll them over into refurbishing and maintaining the building. So there's no large amount of funds to repair the 4% unlettable space we have. Yeah.
Thank you.
Honorable Member for St. James North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to Honorable Minister and your team. And my question is, in fact, could be construed as a follow-up to that offered by the by the Honorable Member for Christchurch West just now in terms of ease of doing business. We have, as a new government, focused a lot of attention on that. I mean, our highly uncompetitive state that we came and found in May last year at being 133 out of 190 countries in the world in terms of ease of doing business. And part of that, Honorable Minister, had to do with the ministry which you are so assiduously and competently heading within the past 9 months. The corporate registry, for instance, in terms of a 2-3 week time period, which we found in terms of simply forming a company, getting a license, having to write in black ink pen, dot your I, put a capital letter instead of a common letter. Quite frankly, things that, as you would be well aware as a highly experienced lawyer, totally frustrating to not only members of the business community, but of the legal profession too. Whereas in our competitors within this region, a company formed within a day. So therefore, sir, your program 40, sub-program 491, specifically on corporate affairs and intellectual property, but more in the wider framework of how your ministry plans within its competence and within its sphere to assist the government and people of Barbados in making life easier for people who live in Barbados, but also obviously people who wish to invest and who have business interests in Barbados. How do you seek to improve business facilitation and the whole regulatory environment and framework of business in Barbados? so that we could improve this economy? Yeah, registration of business, corporate affairs, international business, the whole sector.
I'm going to let the registrar, who's been of corporate affairs, who I'm sure has been sitting here today expecting that very question and/or comment to respond. But just to say, as I said earlier, it has been recognized that there are many complaints in relation to the corporate registry. Some I have to say are unfair. Some are unfair. And there are some that are more valid. What I can tell you, and the registrar will go into more detail, is that there is now a move to increase the speed of having applications for incorporations and process, in that there's a significant move now to online registrations at the registry, and both in relation to the corporate registry and the intellectual property office as well in the ministry. As a broader point, I would say what I started to allude to earlier, that the government is conscious of the needs for reform in the corporate registry. And to be blunt, the government is looking to move in the direction where the corporate registry goes off book from government, quite frankly. And there are, as I may have said earlier, people on the ground in Barbados gathering some information from the corporate registry to move in the direction of making submissions to government as to how they think efficiencies can be improved at the registry. And that their findings and proposals or recommendations or positions should be made known to government by the end of March. But that is to speak to it broadly. I would ask the registrar, who can more than ably defend her department, to know come in at this time.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Heather Clark, the Registrar, Corporate Affairs and Director of Intellectual Property. Sorry about that, Madam Chair. Yes, in addition to, the Minister spoke at the introduction, and he just reiterated the proposal whereby the government of Barbados has brought on board consultants to look to see, given the legislative framework and the available procedures, how we might be able to speed up the processes that as it relates to both offices. That exercise is very much ongoing. The consultants were here during the course of this week. And yes, during the course of this week. But in addition, Madam Chair, there are several initiatives that are ongoing, which we will hope to introduce, which we intend to introduce rather, during the coming financial year, which should also lend towards increased efficiency in the registry. The Honourable Minister, Madam Chair, wasn't here when the Minister spoke of the shortages which we've experienced during the past few months, which has put a further strain on the available resources. But what we intend to do, Madam Chair, is to further integrate information technology in many of our processes in the corporate registry, and that those processes are being fine-tuned. In the coming weeks, we should notify our stakeholders, including, the attorneys who play a critical role in one of our major stakeholders, with respect to some of the initiatives that are going to be introduced with respect to the processing and the finalization of documents. During about approximately 4 years ago, an online system was introduced, and that has led to some in a level of efficiency. We, however, need to go further, much further, and that is appreciated and that is acknowledged. And the initiatives which will be rolled out, some of which we've started, will lend considerably Madam Chair, to an overall improvement in the speed of which we would be able to complete transactions in the registry, and to the overall efficiency of the operations in that office. This, Madam Chair, is buttressed by the fact that the comments which the Honourable Minister alluded, and they relate to the fact that the process, the structure, the systems are all being reviewed, and that is very much a work in progress. So I anticipate, Madam Chair, that there will be a significant improvement in the way we do business from our end during the coming year.
Thank you. And our last set of questions from the Honourable Member of Christchurch South.
I just need
Sorry, go ahead.
Just a follow-up supplementary, if I may, Madam Chair. Relating to this, of course, Minister, your ministry ties in with other ministries, mine included, in terms of the Immigration Department, trying to, because we as a government, and this isn't any new policy, this is a policy followed by previous governments in principle, trying to attract high net worth individuals to Barbados to form companies, to bring in foreign exchange, to expand businesses, to create employment. Obviously, all respecting the culture of Barbados and our individual norms, observing our principles of labor relations and our recognition of trade union rights. But wondering, Minister, what your ministry is doing at policy framework level in terms of trying to expand our capacity and our ability and our attractiveness for high net worth individuals to, come and make Barbados their second home, their principal place of domicile for their businesses. Again, this follows on a bit from the Honourable Member for Christchurch West, but given an opportunity to use that with specifically as well, to see how your ministry and the Immigration Department under my ministry can work together to advance this cause for the betterment of our people.
We can always work together, as you say, but not strictly my ministry, but I would say this, that is all part of the marketing thrust of what we're doing. And in that particular question that you're asking, I think the ministry is actually blessed that our advisor, actually, Mr. Arundel, actually has that as his primary area, target area in the international business arena, high net worth individuals. So we are at a distinct advantage in that regard. But I do take your point that we, as ministries, we have to work together, collaborate a lot more to see how together we can initiate policies and strategies to attract these high net worth individuals. Although, as I said, it's not strictly under my ministry. Yeah. PS would like to add something.
Madam Chair, Sonia Foster, Acting Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of International Business and Industry. I just wanted to add to that, as was said earlier, I sit on the board of Invest Barbados, and they are sort of a coordinating agency for all these things. So they do work with us, they work with immigration, and they usually coordinate marketing of high net worth individuals. And when they bring them to Barbados, then they also work with our ministry, they work with immigration, all other agencies, whether it be the police or town country planning, to ensure that it is a smooth transition from where they're coming from to Barbados. So we are actually working together comprehensively to deal with this area. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Christchurch South.
Very much, Madam Chair. I think, Minister, good afternoon to your team. I think your CEO of BIDC made partial reference to something I intended to raise in relation to industrial estates. And I think you said 96%, you have 96% occupation.
We have
86?
85% is occupied. 11% is available but unoccupied because of the nature of those spaces, and 4% are unlettable.
Right. I wanted to raise a somewhat larger issue in relation to industrial estates, and to make the point that the profile of these estates has changed. As you know, that was an outgrowth of the Arthur Lewis industrialization by invitation policy back in the 50s and 60s. And those estates, Minister, you know about Grisettes, for example. And then there is Newton and the airport and the harbor, 60s and 70s, bristling with activity. And in recent times, we have not been seeing that. And one can be misled into believing that business has actually declined. That is not necessarily so, because a lot of business has gone into the local communities. People have migrated from the estates and have gone into the local communities. So there has been a migration away from the industrial estates. And of course, after the tax holidays ended, some of them would have left. So I say a migration, the actual physical migration has been out of Barbados, but business itself has migrated into local communities. You have people doing their businesses at home, you have mechanics doing their businesses next to their houses, and that, I suppose, has been evidence that business has not contracted, that's the term I was looking for, but that business has actually expanded in Barbados. And I think we all agree that if an economy is to become prosperous, we must encourage business, and secondly, we must encourage businesses to make money. And we have hundreds, thousands of young people in Barbados now who are interested in business and who are interested in self-employment. And I'm wondering if the BIDC, under your ministry, Minister, would consider not to rest on the laurels of 85% occupancy, but to pursue a policy, persuading the Ministry of Finance, of course, to pursue a policy of constructing new estates, not after the Lewis model, but for a new model, for young, industrious, bright Barbadians who are involved in IT and the lighter, and pardon the expression, the lighter and cleaner industries, photography, film production, IT, as I said, and to create new zones of industrial development for our young people. And I'm wondering if that is a possibility under your ministry.
Okay. Madam Chair, I will say certainly. It is a proposal we have discussed for several years. Certainly within the last few years I've been CEO, we've looked at the acres of land we have at Newton Business Park, which is ideally designed, and for that kind of arrangement, the buildings currently occupied by Gildan, that was to be the start of building out that area for IT and softer types of manufacturing, if I should say that. One of the other challenges in which we believe would be an easier fix and is to retrofit some of the larger factory spaces, warehouse type facilities into smaller units, because smaller units are being demanded. We're faced with a situation where we've had to give persons more space than they need and then build them for what they need, as opposed to what we've given them, because the spaces are too big. And we believe that we should enter into a program where we can retrofit those spaces, reduce some of them. We've been able to accommodate that kind of arrangement in the harbor, but the large facilities, and to some extent at some of the smaller units we have at Grantley Adams and the Pine, but the larger ones, we still have too many industrial estates that are too large for the kind of operations we have in Barbados. But the funding is a problem.
Yes, and when we say funding, is this the department starved of funds from government, or are you talking about funding by these entrepreneurs?
We're talking funding from government. As I said before, we do not get any funding for capital works. We're just rolling over the rents we receive to maintain what we have. We thought of going after a loan arrangement, but it was difficult under the recent economic conditions. Hopefully, after we are through with this program, maybe we'll be able to secure a loan, because certainly we wouldn't get grants to build industrial estates. But to get a loan somehow to put down some new modern estates, that is definitely what's needed in Barbados.
I can say to you happily during this exchange, a minister in the Ministry of Finance is looking in your direction with some interest in what you're saying, of course. Okay. And I would want to urge you seriously as a department, and to urge the minister, as a minister in a progressive government, to pursue a policy in which those buildings can be, I don't know if this is a term, micro reconfigured to accommodate our thousands of young entrepreneurs in this country. And I see the honorable member for Christchurch East Central present and very, very interested in the discussion. So I would suggest that with some matter of urgency, he be petitioned on behalf of the young people of Barbados who deserve that opportunity. Thank you very much.
Ma'am, I just want to ask for inquiring minds, for the, coming down a little bit, for the potential small business owners. I'm aware that BIDC, I believe, stand on the correction, did a course with fashion design, and I understand that they did quite well. How easy is it for a young person who came up with a good model to enter the overseas market with respect to being paid? Because sometimes when you sell online, is it easy for them to access the money? Because somebody I know was having issues along that line in terms of she found the market, but in terms of being paid online, PayPal or whatever, it was proving a little difficult. Do y'all help with that? Okay.
The payment range, Madam Chair, the payment arrangements are kind of out of my league. Okay. But I know that there is a young Barbadian who is doing just that, but she does not operate from Barbados. Okay. What we have done recently at the BIDC is she spoke at our Innovate conference, and we brought her in to actually train, and there's a training program currently ongoing or soon about to start, where this person, who actually does not even manufacture, design, and source garments for a certain type of body, is able to export all over the world and be very successful. So she is currently running a course for the BIDC and how you can do just that. So feel free to
Thanks so much for that. Honourable member for St. Michael West Central. Final question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I note that I believe it's the general manager of the BIDC, CEO of the BIDC, had talked about the occupancy rates at the industrial estates and the arrears of about 4.6. I'm not sure what percentage of arrears would be attributable or applicable to the manufacturing sector, but I know going back in the 1960s and 70s, manufacturing was the bedrock of the industrial estates in Barbados. But I want to find out and to ask the CEO, has the BIDC commissioned any studies to address the issue of competitiveness and profitability in the manufacturing sector with the use of attendant technology? Because I know that, like as I said before, that sector, especially manufacturing, is very competitive. So I just wanted to get your views on in respect of manufacturing in Barbados.
Okay, Madam Chair. There was a competitiveness study done in recent years, sponsored by the IDB. It didn't specifically speak to manufacturing, but the industrial policy we're looking to put in place and to roll out would address that. We will be looking at the constraints and the conducting research to determine the type of manufacturing that may be best suited to Barbados at this stage in our development. And the process, which process is best suited to Barbados, because you know with the value chains, the whole product don't have to be produced in one place. So we are hoping that the industrial policy can bring up that kind of information, where we will conduct research, we would review the sector, we look at the issues we're experiencing with the constraints, and hopefully we will be able to address them over a period of 5 years. So to answer the question asked, we haven't conducted a study in recent times, but it is anticipated that that will happen within the next 5 years.
Thank you. We invite the Honorable Minister of International Business and Industry. Sorry. Honorable Member, Andrew.
Yes, you have been the face of international business generation in this country, at least certainly since May 2018. I don't think it is simply because of the fact that you are Minister of International Business. It has a lot to do with your energy. I think that you've certainly energized the international business sector. And you've also indicated to us that you have had a number of road shows and you've been visiting a number of areas in the international arena and promoting international business in Barbados and certainly the international business sector. Are you satisfied, though, notwithstanding the fact that we have had this suite of legislation, that Barbados has done enough to make ourselves more competitive, and at the same time, where the EU and the OECD is concerned, are you satisfied that the blacklisting of Barbados is not still something that is in the air? And do you think that there are other things that we can still do to make Barbados one of the leading countries in terms of sort of improving our international business competitiveness, not only in the region but in the world?
I think that we have done as much as we could have been expected to do at this time. As I said, you know, we had to do a lot in a very, very short period of time. I think that the way we have restructured our taxation really sort of made the world our business. I think we can compete very, very, very well with that rate we've put in place. The sliding scale down to 1% is certainly very, very competitive. We have, in fact, been doing a lot to improve the ease with which business can be done in Barbados. And I think that in relation to the OECD and so on that you mentioned, I was very careful today to say about 3 or 4 times that we have, in fact, complied with the standards set by the globally recognized body for the setting of international tax standards. And if a country can do that, really, I don't know what more they can be expected to do. So therefore, on that basis, I think that there's no basis for anybody to challenge our standards anymore. If anyone were to seek to do that, they'll certainly, in my view, have to justify it, because when you meet the standards set by the highest globally recognized standard setting body, there's no higher that you can go. So I think, to answer your question, simply I think that we have done well. I'm not claiming the credit on my own, because I've had a team with me that has worked very, very, very hard. But yes, I think that we are in as good a place as we can be, given the time frame we had. And I think we have done the best that we could have done. I am expecting results from the thrust that we're having now in the international arena. And you couldn't expect to get results on the spot, because you yourself, member for St. Andrew, you have been in the international business sector. You still are, well, not now, but certainly up to May last year you would have been. So you know that these things don't happen on site, but you have to invest time, effort, and product, and I think we have.
But in terms of the legislative changes, have there been any complaints in your travels since we've had that suite of legislation?
No, there have been none at all, and neither overseas nor here by the local service providers. They seem quite happy that we have done. Initially, some were wondering what would have happened because it was a slight increase in the rates payable compared to what were there before. But they have all been reporting that their clients are willing to stick it out. And we have, as the director said earlier, there haven't been any cases where we have been told that there's any plan for any mass exodus of companies. So we're feeling pretty comfortable.
We invite the minister to give his summary and move that the headstand part.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I first of all would like to thank my staff for coming and very ably assisting in the presentation of the ministry's policies. I'd like to thank all those members who asked questions of us this afternoon. Some were quite deep and certainly some were quite wide, but we welcome all types of questions. I would like to think that we answered them well, or well enough. Can be seen that we have a quite interesting workload ahead of us in the coming financial year. We intend to press on in our drive to get business from the international community, and we've already started. We're going to increase that tempo come April 1st when the new financial year begins. On the local front, it is recognized that the manufacturing sector is significantly down. I didn't even get a chance to give the figures earlier, but they were down. Perhaps in the course of the budget, I will go into greater detail. But we do intend through our industrial policy to really try to get the manufacturing sector back on track. And we're not going to be doing, it's going to be, first of all, going to be a process that involves the widest possible consultation with all stakeholders so as to get full feedback on what they will wish to see included in the industrial plan. And I think perhaps most significantly, it won't be business as usual in terms of just trying to retool or retrain existing industries, but we definitely intend to go beyond that to see about the establishment and the coming into being of new subsectors as well in relation to the manufacturing sector. So yes, there's a continued role for apparel and such like, but at the same time we recognize, I think as one member said this evening, there's a lot of technology out there now, and therefore we have to ensure that we incorporate companies that deal in technology now into the manufacturing sector more fully. Of course, there's also the issue of the green technology, which we also have to embrace. There was actually a whole project, there is a whole project in relation to greening in the ministry, which we didn't even get to touch on this afternoon, but we are conscious of that. And with God's help, Madam Chair, we will ensure that we can bring the sector back up to speed, as I said earlier, to generate jobs, earn foreign exchange, and contribute significantly to the alleviation of poverty in the country. I thank you, Madam Chair. And with that, I beg to move that Head 89? 13. Head 39 stand part.
Question is that Head 39 in the amount of 14,947,575 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All honorable members against, please say nay. We think the ayes have it.
Head 36, Ministry of Energy and Water Resources, in the amount of $31,396,706.
Madam Chair, I beg your leave to invite the members of my ministry and supporting staff to come forward and assist.
Permission granted.
Madam Chair, we're here in respect of Head 36, Ministry of Energy and Water Resources. Under our ministry are the following statutory corporations: the Barbados National Oil Company Limited, the National Petroleum Corporation, Barbados National Terminal Company Limited, the Barbados Water Authority, and the Electric Light and Power Committee. I would just like from the outset to extend the apologies of Ms. Lizelle Weeks, the chairman of the LPAC. She had to travel, and Ms. Lady Worrell, who is the chairman of the Barbados Water Authority, had a family emergency, and she left in the wee hours of this morning.
I now invite the Honourable Minister, Energy and Water Resources, to give her opening remarks. I ask that you move the head.
Madam Chair, these are exciting times for our ministry. I have been charged with an extraordinary task in respect of global impact, and the most important task of our ministry over the next year and the years following is to identify the roadmap that will take Barbados to become, by 2030, at least a fossil fuel free country, and at the minimum, a carbon neutral country. This is a very, very important task that requires not just the efforts of our ministry and its staff and all of the statutory corporations which fall under the ministry, but this is a task that requires the efforts of each and every Barbadian. Climate change is perhaps the greatest issue facing the world today, and as a small island developing state, we are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and the rising ocean levels. I mean, climate change is such a major issue at the moment that I think it was about 2 weeks ago that peoples in the United Kingdom went on strike to highlight the effects of climate change. It is a younger generation, and I do include myself and some of my colleagues, not all, but some of them, within the young and the leader of the opposition, as younger generation for the purpose of this. I mean, it is we who will be on the forefront of the fight against climate change and trying to protect the world from becoming a place that is really inhospitable. But it is not just energy and the 2030 vision of the ministry that falls to be considered under this head. The Barbados Water Authority is another important component of the ministry, and it is our duty to ensure that each and every Barbadian, from St. Lucie in the north, St. Lucie and St. Peter in the north, to Christchurch and St. Philip in the south, that they all have access to safe and reliable water at affordable prices. But, Madam Chair, while these things sound simple, we, on the 25th of May 2018, inherited a number of issues. We inherited the South Coast sewage crisis. where we had sewage spilling into the streets of Barbados. We inherited a Bridgetown sewage treatment plant that was on the verge of collapse. We inherited a Barbados Water Authority that was indebted in the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars and was giving out contracts like sweeties to children. But despite this, we have exciting programs in place and great plans for the year ahead. I'm sitting on what this government believes will be the engine to drive wealth creation for the ordinary Barbadian through the renewable energy revolution, and through participation eventually in the partial ownership of the Barbados National Oil Company Limited. Barbados is soon in a position to exploit both renewable and non-renewable assets, and rather than seeking to consolidate wealth in the hands of a few people, we believe that these things which are part of our patrimony should be shared in their ownership by Barbadians. Within the immediate future, we will settle the license with the utility, that is the Barbados Light and Power. And the eventual settlement will likely not see the license in its current form, where there's a monopoly both on generation and distribution of electricity in Barbados. But we're settling this license to ensure that there are equitable opportunities for generation, even if BLMP retains the majority role in distribution because they do own the grid. We're encouraging the development of solar PV as a vehicle to enfranchise Barbadians, as well as to make our energy supply more climate resilient. To do this, we will have to necessarily improve the stock in Barbados and also make that more resilient to weather events. So the development of the vision of our ministry and our projects over the next year will not just benefit the ministry and the sector we represent, but they have spin-off benefits that affect Barbadians at all levels. We saw the results in Dominica, where generations of progress was wiped out within hours. We're not God. We can't prevent a major climatic event, but we can, by our actions, by the actions that we take now, mitigate the risks and devastation occasioned by it. We're trying to ensure that the energy generation in Barbados is distributed. Madam Chair, if we look at what happened in Dominica recently, when the hurricanes tore Dominica apart, up to now there are places in Dominica that still have not gotten the electricity back. There's still people living in less than ideal situations. Dominica was devastated, and it will take them many generations to come back to where they were. Our vision in our energy policy and the distribution of the generation of energy and the pushing of the solar PV and the pushing of the renewable energy sector is geared at ensuring not just that we have cheap and reliable electricity, but it's geared at ensuring that, Father forbid, when a disaster does hit us, as one eventually will, that we're able to bounce back quickly and not be in a position like Dominica. So we cannot continue to operate in silos. So even in the area of electric mobility, we have to secure a Barbados where 100% of the vehicles are powered either by electricity or some other form of clean energy. Electric vehicles must not be seen, just simply be seen as vehicles powered by electricity. But if you think about it and take it to its logical conclusion, an electric vehicle is a mobile battery storage. So you can charge your electric vehicle from a solar panel, run your car during the day, and at night you can, technically speaking, plug your car back in to power your house. So this is not just an ideal, but this has a practical application in terms of, for example, if there's a natural disaster, your house can be self-sufficient while the grid is down by the solar panels or the other renewable energy, and by having an electric vehicle. But it is not all altruistic. So while we want to have a clean country, why we want to use renewables because it's fashionable, the fact is, for a more practical resource, one of the major drains on our foreign exchange reserves is the purchase of oil and gas and other forms of fossil fuels from overseas. So practically, Barbados cannot afford to continue generating energy in the way that we have before. It makes sense. We are a country that's surrounded by water. We have consistent trade winds. We have sunshine pretty much every day of the year. So it makes sense that we start now to invest in a renewable source rather than continuing to run down the finite sources we have or trying to source them from overseas. Madam Chair, our government is further committed to ensuring that Barbadians have a chance to participate at every level, not just in having a solar panel on your house, but even in terms of projects. If you remember, Madam Chair, when cellular technology first came to Barbados, it was legislated that all of the investment, all of the companies had to have a 25% ownership by locals. And we intend to do the same thing for major renewable energy projects. So whether it be an individual, or if the individuals can't afford it by themselves, whether it be through pension plans or credit unions or some other vehicle, we plan to secure a place in this revolution for the average Barbadian, so that the average Barbadian benefits from our progression as a country towards renewable energy. Madam Chair, we are also committed as a government to making Barbados a worldwide center of excellence for research and development and innovation in the area of renewable energy. It is in our best interest to be on the cutting edge of this development. Barbados pioneered solar technology with solar water heaters, and we allow the rest of the world to pass us out. We do not intend to do the same thing. Because it is so important to us as a country, we need to get University of West Indies on board. We need to get the science students on board. We need to bring the best brains that are Barbadians back home to help us to not just develop for ourselves, but to innovate for the rest of the world. There's a Barbadian, but I'm sure I'm going to call his name because he's someone of note to all of us, and it's also in the most positive way. There's a Barbadian called Carlton Cummings. He is one of the leading developers now in the world. I think he was named in the top 30 entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs in the world. And he's pioneering battery storage development. And there's no good reason why he should not come back into Barbados and do it from here and bring other people along. Thank you for that lone voice crying in the wilderness. Madam Chair, that's the exciting part. The part of my ministry that is not as sexy is water. And we know that Barbados has had some challenges with the water supply and with the sewage network. And there are a number of persons who are dislocated by reason of their lack of access to water. But neither the chair of the Water Authority, the general manager, the staff of the Water Authority, or myself will sleep well and be able to measure success unless we're in a position where water is distributed to everybody in Barbados who needs it. I cannot promise perfection in this one, Madam Chair, but I can guarantee I'll bend my back and work tirelessly every day, along with the rest of the management, to improve the delivery of the water service in Barbados. And we have started already. We've taken a decision to upgrade all of our sewage treatment plants in Barbados to tertiary. Half of the problem with the South Coast crisis was the fact that it was untreated sewage. Had that sewage been treated to some other tertiary level where the water could be better used inland to recharge the aquifers or in agriculture or in manufacturing, then there would not have been that issue with the byproduct out of the plant coming up on the streets. But we are in discussions presently with the CDB in relation to the permanent outfall of Worthing, and we're also talking to the European Investment Bank and CAF about the upgrade of the plants to tertiary. We're also in discussions with respect to pilot project to use a modular solar desalination plant to allow us to bring back online a number of the wells that have been overpumped. Some of the wells, because of the shortage of water in the central and northern parishes, have been overpumped to the point where we're pulling from the wells brackish water, salty water. And when this project comes on stream, and with the success of this project, we expect to be able to bring a number of wells that we've taken offline back into production, and that should help to complement the water reserves in the affected parishes. So we are not just sitting back, Madam Chair. We are pushing to do everything we can to alleviate the suffering of Barbadians in this respect. Immediately, we are looking to increase, or we're going to increase the supply of water from the Ionics desalination plant. That's the one in Spring Garden. The former minister, Madam Chair, had negotiated an increase in production, but it was at a...
You have about a minute.
Yes, Madam Chair. They had negotiated an increase in production with Ionics, but to be honest, the cost of the desalined water was prohibitive. I would like to commend those in my ministry, as well as the Minister of Finance, who was able to negotiate a reduction of, I believe, 15% of that contract price. So this now makes the use of desalined water to supplement the areas who are affected by outages and the reservoirs affected by the outages a more viable option. Madam Chair, I inherited a litany of woes from contracts that were given out by the last administration, including quite a few in the dying days. 2 desal plants that the Barbados Water Authority cannot up to now convince me that we need, that with the increased capacity from Ionics would have put another $100 million in debt on the Barbados Water Authority per year. And that does not even include contracts for 2 other temporary desal plants in St. Lucie and Trent. We're looking to cut the water bill because the Barbados Water Authority is the largest consumer of electricity in the country. We're looking to cut that electricity bill by introducing renewable energy, solar and wind, to provide the power for the pumping stations and for the reservoirs. And there are other things that the Barbados National Oil Company is into in the area of renewable energy, but we'll get to that in the questions. The bottom line, Madam Chair, in wrapping up, these are exciting times. We are on the cusp of an energy revolution, and we're in the process of revolutionizing our treatment of wastewater in Barbados. So while we have to balance our ambitions with the practical reality of fiscal constraints and the need to upgrade our delivery system for potable water by identifying new sources and replacing our aging pipes and main infrastructure, we are facing our responsibilities in both energy and water head on, and we will work tirelessly for the betterment of all Barbados. I have to say this one last thing. I want to thank the staff of the Barbados Water Authority who work above and beyond the call in carrying out a near miracle on the South Coast and getting the sewage crisis under control. The Barbados Water Authority often comes in for a lot of flack, but I believe credit must be given where credit is due, and they pulled out all of the stops and did what people thought was impossible, so I wish to commend them. Thank you.
Could you move the head, please, Honourable Minister?
I would like to move that head number 36 in the amount of $33,164,760 stamp part.
31 million.
31 million.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, ma'am. I want to say good afternoon to the Minister and his team and thank them for being here. I understand we have maybe 3 or 4 hours for this interaction, so perhaps this time we can range far and wide. I have reserved my softest strokes and easiest questions for this particular minister because he does vote for me, and I anticipate that he will again. So I plan to be very kind to him. But some broad areas which I hope the time he has will allow him to address for the interest of the Parliament, certainly my own interests and the interests of the alternative voice in Barbados, which I seek to represent. A few things upon which I hope he will be able to not only wax eloquently, but wax fulsomely. And one of them he referred to, and that is the matter of redressing the monopoly situation that obtains in Barbados with respect to energy. This party in a former administration is to be credited for significantly changing, revolutionizing the matter of telecommunications in Barbados. And I think that the energy monopoly, which it virtually is, that now obtains, has similarly to be addressed. As we go forward, I look forward to hearing in greater detail how that constitutes a part of the vision of the minister and his team and how it's represented in the estimates before us. Concomitantly, of course, is the question of the renewables, the renewable energy. I'd like to hear some more fulsome details with respect to that vision. We hear a lot of talk about changing the whole culture around energy in Barbados. Getting into the renewables, we have set cutoff points at 2030, is it? We're working towards, and he suggested as a minimum a carbon neutral situation. So I'm asking that in the time he has and the team, that we may have some responses on the matter of detailing for us the vision for the renewables in Barbados. Also, with respect to that matter, the issue of emerging opportunities for persons who, big or small, who may want to invest in the renewable energy sector in Barbados, and how are you going to facilitate a culture and a context in which those investment ambitions and aspirations may be realized. The state is a big user of energy, and if we are going to change the profile of energy use in Barbados, the state must lead by example, and therefore the whole business of cost savings to the government would be a question we would want to hear addressed insofar as that particular energy use profile is concerned. Sewer system challenges. The minister has just given credit to the Barbados Water Authority for what he calls the almost miraculous job done with respect to addressing our sewage problems on the South Coast. We have sewage problems in the city, and in fact there is emerging some smaller context sewage problems in urban Barbados. Certainly in St. Michael West, there are 2 or 3 spots where this is becoming a bother. So we will want to hear a bit more detail as to where we are right now with respect to addressing the problems at Christchurch, addressing the problems in Bridgetown, and where do we go with respect to that tomorrow. Offshore energy exploration, I see that there's some signature bonus provided for here in the estimates. I imagine that might relate to that, and I would imagine that the minister's team would speak to the offshore, potential offshore energy exploration and the plans to address that. If you're talking about embracing the renewables, then we have to address what do we do with potential resources existing offshore in Barbados and the possibility of exploiting and exploring those for the benefit of the country. Contract renegotiations, the minister did speak with that. That is an ugly and dark topic in Barbados, almost entirely across the landscape of government with respect to various ministries. And he has just indicated to us that there's a story of woe with respect to contract situations relative to the Barbados Water Authority, for instance, and we want to know where we're going with renegotiating the state and government's position with respect to some of those unfortunate, now existing arrangements. And perhaps I come from St. Joseph, Madam Chair, and my navel string is buried there, my roots are lodged there. Yeah, always admitted I came from St. Joseph. Never had a problem with that, man, not at all, not at all. I come from St. Joseph and proudly so. But the issue is, ma'am, what befalls those who reside in the east of Barbados, St. Joseph, St. John, St. Andrew, and other parts. They're the east of Barbados with respect to the water difficulties and challenges which they're having. We understand as being forecast right now that there's going to be a period of drought descending upon us, and I dread to think what would befall those who live in those parts. So these are some of the broad concerns which I have, which I'm sure the minister is quite capable of addressing, and he has a worthy team along with him, who I'm sure will assist him in any lack he might personally experience. I thank you.
Thank you. The House is now open to questions. Please remind our guests that as you speak. This committee is now open to questions. I want to remind our guests that please, when you speak, introduce yourself and state your post. We'll start with the Honourable Member for St. Peter, Lucy.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to the Honourable Minister and his team. Let me begin by congratulating the Honourable Minister and the team for the successes with regards to the tremendous work that's being done with the South Coast Sewage Project. and dealing with the problems at the Bridgetown sewage project as well. I know that he is a very hard-working minister. I can see from that, not just a minister, but in his former life, I might add, he's been very hard-working as well. And it is because of the successes registered so far with the projects that I have a sense of hope this evening, because the people of St. Lucie sent me here as I left this morning, having had to struggle, I mean really struggle to get a bath, because there have been dry taps in St. Lucie, in areas of St. Lucie now for the past few weeks. The situation which visited us from in June 2015 to early 2016 is upon us again. It is very difficult to go through 6 months having dry taps, cannot do your business properly, and now 4 years on, it seems that we have to go through the same issues or the same situation again. But I am confident, and I am putting my confidence in the minister and his team. You have worked wonders, the South Coast, and the people in Oxford, in Mountgay, in Alexandria, in Cottage, in Tree Hill. And these are some areas, 2 areas at least I call related to St. Peter, because we share, myself and the member of Parliament for St. Peter, share borders in a number of these areas. So when the water is off, in my area, for instance, Alexandria, I know that Daytrill is having problems. I know that Boscobel is having problems in places like Harmony and Careful, where we have 2 centenarians, in places like Lowlands, and so on. I can name a good few more districts that have been affected.
You have a few seconds left. If you're asking a question or comment.
I am asking a question, ma'am. I am giving preamble.
Your time is up, so could you
my time is up. Well,
yes,
I will ask a question directly. What is happening, or what plans does the BWA minister have to remedy and to deal once and for all with the water situation that affects the people of in the constituency of St. Lucie?
Basically, the answer that we give in relation to St. Lucie is going to be the same answer for all the affected areas. It's a technical one, so I'm actually going to turn this over to the General Manager of the Barbados Water Authority.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. And through the Chair, we know that this is a pivotal and a very challenging issue for all of Barbados, and I do welcome the opportunity to be able to respond on behalf of the Barbados Water Authority, certainly, and on behalf of the Ministry. Climatic change has affected us and has added its challenges to our ability to manage the supply of water, and we are taking that very seriously. The outages that we've experienced around the country have been attributed mainly to 3 incidents or 3 factors. We have had an increased number of bursts, main bursts, and that is primarily because we've had an aging fleet going back to at least 1857. And that, as its age has been presenting a number of problems. We have also had weather issues, which has resulted in increased demand as the dry season comes upon us, and particularly in light of the drought that's now ahead of us. The drought conditions are quickly manifesting themselves. We have also had frequent interruptions or frequent disruptions in pumping as a result of electrical outages. And these disruptions have actually damaged quite a number of our pumping systems. And these are the three main areas in which we find ourselves doing battle. But specific to St. Lucie, particularly over the last 2 weeks, and we have been sensitive to what has been happening in the half-acre area through Lamberts, with Bosqueville being at the end of that distribution system, and a number of the territories, a number of the areas you have listed in terms of Date Tree and so on. We have had some challenges with the Hope Desal plant. The pumping system went down. We repaired it, it went down again. We had to repair it, it went down a third time. We pulled the entire system down, we rigged it up properly, we put a non-return valve, and that system is now up and running. It takes a little while for that system to replenish, but we know that over the weekend we should start seeing the fruits of that labor. We should start seeing water going into that system. But what you really want to know is, what is it that the Barbados Water Authority has in its plans? What can the Barbados Water do to alleviate this situation, a particular situation that finds itself manifesting again, time and time again, 4 years later? The short-term pursuits, which are not necessarily the best, we are continuing to install community tanks. These are but a temporary and a fallback measure, not only in terms of these particular instances, but also for emergency events. We are deploying our tanker fleets as often as we can, certainly pushing as much as we can, and we are hopeful that as the Barbados Water Authority moves, not we're hopeful rather, we're certain that as the Barbados Water Authority moves into a shift system, we'll be able to manage the supply on a 24-hour basis. But medium term, you'll be happy to know that we do have some plans that are afoot. In the case of the St. Joseph area, we will be installing, completing rather, the installation of a booster station in Bushy Park. And that station will push an extra 250,000 gallons million gallons per day into the Bowmanston Golden Ridge distribution system, which will in turn feed the Casa Grande system, and that will supply additional water into the St. Andrew and St. Joseph area in particular. In addition to that, with the expansion of the desalination plant at Spring Garden, we will be installing another booster station at Trent. The expansion at Spring Garden will put into our distribution system another 15 million gallons per day. And that will be pushed to the Lazaretto, to Carlton, up into the Trent. And that booster station would then serve to push a combined 1 million extra 1 million gallons of water per day into three main areas. Some will move towards the north, which will also help to replenish the same areas you have mentioned. Some will move through Lancaster, through Apeshill, into the Casa Grande area, again adding additional supply into the St. Andrew, St. Joseph area. And particularly the third area that water will be supplied or augmented to will be the St. Thomas area through Shop Hill. Shop Hill will actually feed St. Thomas, St. George, and so areas such as Redmond Village, Welches, and those surrounding districts will see that the outages will mitigate more and more. We recognize the challenges there, and we are pushing as fast as we can to get these booster stations in effect. As a matter of fact, the Bushy Park booster station should be completed by the end of March. That for Chents should be completed by the end of April, early May. So in short order, and certainly as the drought hits upon us or comes upon us, we believe that we see that we'll be able to add or augment the water system. But that is not all. We are also looking to manage what we will call the water balance in our distribution system even more acutely. There are areas which are less pressed or less stressed with issues where we will push some of those to a system of valves and connections into other areas which have less issues. We have to maintain that water balance to ensure that we're maximizing the delivery to all of those areas, to those particular areas in need. We also will be managing and have started to manage shutdown or shut-off systems at night in certain areas to ensure that water is more evenly distributed to those areas in need. So for instance, when you look at the Golden Ridge and Bowmanston area, that is an area that we'll be able to manage through valve system to ensure that we're pushing more water into the Casa Grande and the St. Joseph area. Now, those are what we will call the short to medium term measures. We cannot escape the fact that we have a situation with our mains. They are aging, and we have a problem with burst mains. And for that, to that end, we are looking on the long term, medium to long term, to do a massive or continual mains replacement program. We have started that mains replacement program, and we are currently under the auspices of CDB, through CDB as an IFI, International Funding Agency. We will be repairing 30 kilometers of mains in critical areas and around the Golden Ridge area, particularly in other areas, to ensure that our distribution is less hampered or that our water supply reaches its intended destination. We also, to the CAF EIB, we're looking at an additional mains replacement of 23 kilometers. But this is not the only source of losses that we have in our system. Through these agencies, we will be placing at least 7 reservoirs. Installing another 6 steel tank reservoirs, and under CAF EIB, we'll be looking at another 11 reservoirs and repairs. When we look at this holistically, it's not just a matter of main repairs. We have reservoirs that are leaking that have to be repaired and we replace. We have mains that we have to replace in particular areas. We have 2,200 kilometers of mains, and in addition to that, we have quite a number of pipes themselves. If we look at the study in 1997, I apologize, Chair, I think I've gone over my time.
It was interesting. I trust that answers your question, honorable member?
Yes, but I have a follow-up.
Once it's related, that's fine.
Having heard of we talked about water from the desal plant, pushing water, this is on Spring Garden, down the west coast to Ashton Hall. Ashton Hall feeds Allendale, and Allendale on to Half Acre. What about, there is talk of some wells at Hope Road, the Hope Plantation. Have we explored that? Have we looked at that? What are the plans? Because I heard this, I remember, and I see Dr. John. I remember going to a town hall meeting and hearing him speak of this. So I want to know if that is all a part of the plan or if it was considered.
My name is John Mwanza.
John Mwanza, yeah.
Technical advisor to the Water Authority. You would have heard the general manager talk about the desal plant in St. Lucie. That is at Hope Plantation. So the well that would have talked about at Hope is the one that we have a package desalination plant at, which had some problems last week and has been put back into production. So there is no additional wells that are going to be constructed at the Hope.
Beverly.
Madam Chair.
Madam Chair. Madam Chair, right. I just want members to understand as well, the difficulty is not simply in getting the water to send through the pipes, but we have another difficulty because some of the mains are from 1866, 1856. When you start to increase the pressure through those mains to augment supply or to feed or to try to get more water into the system, we've been recording a record amount of burst mains. So every time we fix a main or fix a significant stretch of main, then we get a burst in the area just beyond that as more pressure is delivered in there. So we have, Madam Chair, we have inherited a major problem. The Barbados Water Authority is trying its best. It is not as simple as finding water and sending it down. And you're trying to juggle many things at the same time. So I just want members to understand and just remember, as we get all of these systems online and we start to augment the supply, that is going to be accompanied as well by an increase in bursts until we get all the mains replaced.
Thank you. Honorable Member for St. George North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening to the Minister and his team. I want to ask a simple question. Of course, you talk about burst mains and so on, mains that were in place from the, I guess, 17th century. What programs do you have to start your capital work to replace some of these mains? Because I have heard this many times. I've been here for over 25 years, almost 25 years now, and all ministers talk about mains that were in the ground for that length of time. What programs do you have? Because you cannot do all one time. What programs do you have to systematically erase this problem over the next 10 years or so? Because I believe that the Water Authority should look at a long-term program of getting a capital program to replace these old mains. And the other question is one of detection. In an age where you have technology, can you detect these leakages? Because I'm aware that over the past years, the Water Authority has been really operating on guesswork. And you may dig up a whole village to find a main maybe at the end of the village. So in this today's technology, do you have a system to detect burst mains? And if so, how are you doing it? That's my simple question. I have a follow-up question, so I'll come back.
I'm going to let Mr. Halliday first speak to the mains replacement program, and I'll let Dr. Mwanza speak to the technical aspect of the leak detection.
Honorable Minister to the Chair, we are actively engaged in a very capital-intensive program for mains replacement, and it has consideration for the long term. Understand that we have 2,200 kilometers of mains that we have to constantly repair. Understand that we have at least 2,200 kilometers of mains to be repaired. Or rather, we have 2,200 kilometers of mains, much of which needs to be repaired given that it is aged. But it's a very expensive endeavor, and so yes, we are in sync with you that a capital program must stand over several years. At the moment, we are on the verge of starting repairs to 30 kilometers of mains under a CDB loan program. Lined up behind that is an additional loan program with CAF EIB for another 23 kilometers. Every time we work with an IFI or international funding agency, there are two considerations we ensure that we cover. We look at general upgrades of the system, usually reservoirs and otherwise, and we also look at mains replacement, and that will continue to be an active engagement by the Barbados Water Authority going forward.
Yes, with regard to leak detection, Minister, we have had an active leak detection program using modern technology, which we have expanded on. The board approved an establishment of a non-revenue water unit. Non-revenue water is water that the difference between what we put into the system and what we bill to the customers as consumption. We use different types of equipment. There are acoustic equipment, which you have to walk on top of the pipe and listen to the sound of the noise escaping the pipe to identify the location of the pipe, the leak. What we have to recognize is that because of the coral limestone characteristics, not every burst comes up to the ground. So unless you walk the path of the main and listen to the noise, you would never be able to locate it. Additionally, we have logging equipment. These are data loggers that you install on top of the pipe at a certain distance. Those you could put out in the system, and where there is a leak in the system, an alarm goes off. So it gives you an indication which end of the pipe has the leak. So it reduces the amount of time that you spend. Instead of walking the whole length of the pipe, you know you need to concentrate in a particular direction. So we are using equipment, and it is the latest technology that is used in leak detection.
If I can,
yeah.
If I can add further, the leak detection unit has actually helped out some householders. We've all heard from our constituents of people who all of a sudden have a bill up in thousands of dollars, and often they think it's a missed bill, or the Barbados Water Authority has made an error. But in the majority of those instances, and I personally was one of them people, in the majority of those instances, when we dispatch the leak detection unit to the residences of the homeowner, we're able to source and identify leaks that are underground, under driveways that people do not even know are there. So in the majority of instances, it is because people have had a leak going on underground that they have not been able to detect. So the technology is actually quite advanced, and if we were trying to find a leak in a particular road, you can actually track it pretty accurately. We use the same leak detection technology to help out on the South Coast when we're trying to trace the breaches in the force main and also the breaches in the sanitary sewer. So the leak detection unit of the Barbados Water Authority has actually been responding to a number of calls and not billing for it. So they've been trying to help out householders to identify leaks on their property that they would not otherwise be able to source.
My follow-up question, Madam Chair, is this. It has to do with the supply and demand for water, which has to do with great degree of planning. I see development going up all over the place, and I understand, based on our manifesto, that we'll be looking at additional number of businesses and houses in certain areas. In terms of planning, how do you see the Water Authority moving to create the market for your water, and how do you expect the supply base if you say that we have a shortage? Are you going to use more desaled water? Are you going to use more water from the spring? Because I find that this department is should be more aggressive when it comes to look at planning permission. You see, and persons may put on a development and then want water. How do you track these things?
Honourable Minister, I can confirm that the Barbados Water Authority works with a number of ministries to track exactly your concern. And I can list at least one example. We can look at the St. Philip area in the Grove area, where we are aware that a hotel is under construction, and there are a number of developments in the wait for additional water supply. And to that end, we have started to upgrade the mains in those areas. I think we're upgrading one of the mains to a 10-inch main, and we're replacing one of the mains with an 8-inch main. And that also, that really serves, if you want, three purposes. One, it reduces the number of leaks in that particular area and helps to service the areas, particularly those residential areas. Two, it prepares for when the demand surges or increases with the development of the additional business communities and hotel. And thirdly, it aids also in facilitating the water, which I would have indicated through Bussy Park, that would be servicing the Bowminston distribution area, which in turn will flow into the Castle Grant area. But that is one side of the coin. Where the demand is concerned, we cite again the fact that we are looking to produce or add additional, bring into production additional 15 million gallons to the Ionics plant. We are looking to conserve or through losses of water by what has just been described and the aggressive plan of action that we are taking through our non-revenue water department and through our mains replacement. And these are the areas in which we know we can show up the supply of water to the areas that are in demand. But we are working with the town and country planning. We are working with a number of ministries, and every single planning, every single development that is approved, rest assured Barbados Water Authority has an input in that plan.
Let me just add a point of correction from the number given by the general manager. Instead of 15 million, it is 15,000 cubic meters. 15,000 cubic meters, which translates to 3.3 imperial gallons per day. 3.3 million imperial gallons per day. And to add on to what the general manager just added, in the CAF EIB contract that we're about to sign, we have included the preparation of a master plan for water, wastewater, and stormwater management, which will deal with an analysis of the demand projections for now and for the future, and will deal with all the development information that we normally get from the Town and County Planning Office. We have the same GIS database as Town and County Planning, so when they get their development information, they share with us, and we could put it on our system, and we will identify where those demand nodes are going to be.
And just to supplement both answers, the Barbados Water Authority is planning to not have a shortage of water through the programs identified just now, but also we're looking at rainwater harvesting, a serious program of rainwater harvesting, because we're losing too much water runoff straight into the sea when we need to trap that and use it to recharge the aquifers. And the other thing, Madam Chair, and I can't make this point enough, we need to stop seeing the byproduct of the sewage treatment plants as wastage. We have to start seeing it as reusable water. When we are upgrading our plants to tertiary treatment level for the express purpose of being able to use that water inland. A lot of Barbadians can't wrap their mind around it. But when you go to Miami and you turn on the tap in your hotel room, the bulk of that water is reused. When you go to major cities in Europe, like London and France, and you turn on the tap, it's not spring water coming out. That is reused water. So we need to not be pumping millions and millions of gallons per day out into the sea. What we need to be doing is treating it to a standard where it can be properly used inland, either to recharge the aquifer, use it directly in manufacturing, use it for agriculture. But when these things come online, and to be honest, Madam Chair, when we get the upgrades of the plants, the Brishon plant and the South Coast plant, a lot of water will now become available for a lot of things where we are now short.
Yeah, and my final question, Madam Chair, has to do with that it is my view that the Barbados Water Authority, to some extent, has kept back development in certain areas, especially Zone 1. there are certain traditional Zone 1 areas that you all have maintained as Zone 1, but they're not really Zone 1 because the reservoirs that you had over the past 50 years or 100 years do not exist. And I speak about places in the St. Thomas area that you have north of the St. Thomas Parish Church, all the land going from there right to St. Peter, you have categorized as Zone 1. But do you have a reservoir, and do you still use those reservoirs? And I want to find out if the reservoirs that you use over 100 years, if they are still in existence today.
Honorable member, I smile. And there's a good reason for that. Within,
if you don't know, Minister, you can say, I don't know. Come back again. You know?
No, Honorable Member. Through you, Madam Chair, I did not come here to sit down in this chair and tell you I did not know. If I do not know, then somebody behind me must know. But for this one, I actually know. So, Madam Chair, the Ministry of Energy and Water Resources is about to bring before the Cabinet a green paper with respect to water zoning and the water zoning policy in Barbados. We accept that the old standards of Zone 1, Zone 2, Zone 3, and how we qualified and calculated those are no longer the most relevant way to assess those. The old system and the Zone 1 and Zone 2 have taken a lot of land out of productive development that could be actually used in development. There are many areas where you may actually have to sewer or put in sanitation solutions, but that lend themselves to development where with the proper solution it does not affect the aquifer or the aquifer recharge. And the reality, Madam Chair, we have people in Zone 1 and Zone 2, and the bulk of Barbados, even when you're outside of the Zone 1 and Zone 2, if you have a well, if you're flushing your toilets into a well, and that water leaches through, the same water finds itself into the aquifer. So we are about to bring a policy that is going to come before Parliament that addresses and contemplates all of those. How can we best use the land that we have, putting in systems that protect our water to keep our water safe, so we get the maximum use of the water as well as the maximum use of the land. That is where I smiled, because had you not asked that question today, within a couple of weeks, you would have had your answer.
Quick question, what happens to the water wells that exist on private property, like plantations and so on? Do y'all have jurisdiction over those?
Yes, ma'am. Under the old Underground Water Control Act, the then Water Board was responsible for licensing of groundwater obstructions. The wells that predated that act would have been grandfathered in. But when the Water Authority was created, that act was taken up into the BWA Act. So the BWA is responsible for licensing private well obstructions, most of which have been for irrigation.
Thank you. Honorable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I think as the Minister and as the General Manager of the Barbados Water Authority would expect, the people from Boscobel want me to ask specifically about water. And I'm not going to ask, though, the question that would already have been asked, because I think that was properly put. I want to say, by way of contextualizing, that this is an urgent matter. I made a decision, much to the chagrin of my family, not to put in a water tank, because I think it is important to understand what people have to go through when there is no water. I've seen a house burn to the ground in Boscobel, June 1st, 2015. I believe that not having water supply would have contributed to that. I'm not saying that you're responsible for the family not having a home, but it is an example of what can happen. Now, there are a number of things that were mentioned as it relates to water supply, augmentation. What I did not hear, and I want to ask this in 3 parts. I am not sure that I heard an estimated timeline, and the reason why I'm emphasizing estimated is because I know that timelines, I can't hold you to say on the 15th of September, that kind of thing, but what is the estimate? Is this months? Is this years? I am aware that the minister has said publicly that Christmas will not come. That's an undertaking, but Christmas is a little bit far from here. And the people in Boscobel, or what they call the greater Boscobel area, really don't want to wait until Christmas. What is the timeline for having some kind of solution to this vexing problem? But I can ask the others as well, if you want me to. Dr. John is aware of this because I raised it with him at the town hall meeting that was called 2 years ago, only when the water came back. And the people in Boscobel were quite angry about that the Barbados Water Authority turned up after the water came back, so they did not attend the meeting. One of the issues that they have, because they are all reasonable people, they understand that we have droughts and we have challenges. What they were not able to understand, and I feel a little bit peeved about this one, because something significant happened in May last year, but I'm still seeing a pattern. And that is the people in St. Peter and St. Lucie, and in some cases St. Andrew, are not made aware when the water is going to be off. So that when I turn on 100.7, I may hear that water in St. Philip, for example, is going to be off. I'm not sure that I've ever heard that the water in Boscobel or Datetree Hill, Pike Corner, Cave Hill is going to be off today between the hours of what time and this other time. Those people, the residents in those areas, have said to me that they find it disrespectful. And so I am asking, this is not a blame game, I'm thinking about going forward. I am asking if there is some plan to inform the residents of affected areas in a better way than has been done in the past. In a way that, even though you may not have meant it, you meaning the Barbados Water Authority, not you specifically, you may not have meant it to be disrespectful, but in a way that will allow residents to understand that you are not treating some better than others. And so I want to find out what is your plan for that, and also in relation to that, the distribution of tankers, we have a pretty good relationship, Mr. Halliday. I want to thank you for that, a pretty good relationship with you. And when the water is off and the tankers come, I have to compliment you and your team at Barbados Water Authority. You've been very responsive. The only issue in that area has to do with areas that are not really accessible, properly accessible. And we have, like the Honorable Member for St. Lucie said, we have a number of long livers in the north, because the north is probably the best part of the island. And some of them live in places that a truck cannot get to. And while they may be home during the day, they are not persons at home with them who can lift the buckets of water to their homes. And I'm wondering what the Barbados Water Authority, charged with giving drinking water and potable water to the citizens of the country, what can you put in place to alleviate those challenges, especially for older persons and others who are living, let's say, off the beaten track?
Thank you, Honourable Minister Jordan. I will attempt to answer all of the questions with as much detail as I possibly can. Dealing with the estimated timings, we're not going to wait until December, I can assure you of that. By the end of March, we will have additional water flowing into the St. Joseph area. But what will directly affect your constituency is what we're doing through the expansion of the Onyx plant and the increase in water flow through to Lancaster into the north. And that will be in effect by the end of April, early May. What I can say that, and we're acutely aware of the challenges that you've been facing recently, and that was because the desal plant at Hope St. Lucie was down for what I would call an extended period of time in the circumstances, just over 2 weeks. The Hope desal plant sends water into the half-acre distribution system, which then goes into Lamberts, which then goes into Boscobel. Regrettably, Boscobel is at the end of that distribution system, and therefore, while half-acre and Lamberts sometimes may have water, it takes a while for the system to be properly charged where Boscobel is concerned. And that we've realized is a challenge that we've had. What adds to that is the fact that while we have a number of reservoirs in the area, we are admittedly currently not able to fill those reservoirs to maximum capacity because of the state of those reservoirs. Under the CDB program, we will be tackling that. That is a medium to long-term endeavor, so that will probably happen over the next 18 months and not over the next 6 months to a year. But as long as we have the desal plant at Hope going, you should have less incidents of water outages. And once we get the Onyx plant expansion going in full, you should have additional water augmenting those same distribution systems that are affecting much of your constituency. In terms of the notifications, we actually have, I can tell you with certainty, we actually have a comprehensive campaign going at the moment. And I believe you'll be aware of the fact that through the various constituency and districts, we are actively engaged with a number of the ministries to their personal assistance. We were constantly in touch with these individuals as to water outages, and we get feedback going back either way. But we're also not doing that alone. We have a highly integrated media campaign that also takes into account traditional forms of notifications, whether it's through Facebook or news media, radio, or otherwise. And we also have looked at and rather have engaged or changed our telephony systems to have an IVR, integrated voice recordings. So any particular day that you call into a telephone system, any time particularly that you call into a switchboard, you have the option of selecting a recording that indicates you what the current outages are and what exactly is happening. I am very sensitive to what you've said in respect of St. Lucie and St. Andrew typically having not been notified in a timely way. And we've conveyed that to our staff. They're highly sensitive to it, they're highly aware of it. But also in respect of the long livers in St. Lucie, and I share your St. Peter. My apologies, Minister Jordan, in St. Peter. Right, so in respect of those who are living off of the beaten track, our tanker services, the guys who work the tanker services are actually quite aware of the fact that this is a challenge. And most times, as far as we're aware, those are the guys that get out and they actually assist either the disabled, if that is the correct term, or elderly folks who are not able to actually lift the heavy buckets and get the water in place. What we have done is recently is through the same channels that I've listed, we have actually taken and have a list of all those who are affected, the elderly and those who are affected, those who are challenged, to ensure that whenever we have an outage in those areas, we first contact these individuals to make sure that these individuals are supplied with water. If it is that is not being evident enough in St. Peter, we revisit that and make sure that we have the appropriate contacts. But this is the minimum we thought we could do to make sure we address those needs specifically.
Just as a supplement to that, Madam Chair, we attempt to notify, especially when it's a planned shut-off. Sometimes you have to shut down a particular area in order to get the water past that area to another area that might not have had water, or to recharge a reservoir further up the line. So in those instances, we try to notify well in advance of shut-offs. But what also sometimes happens is our system is not as technologically advanced as we would hope. So sometimes there's a burst main somewhere along the line, and we don't know. We don't know until somebody calls. So if there's a burst main and stopping the water from getting past that point, or the pressure is low past the point of the burst, people sometimes call and they get upset that they were not notified. But in many instances, it is not a planned shut-off, so you can't notify in time. But we try, once the call is logged, to put it up on our Facebook to advise what we're doing, that we're undertaking repairs, and an estimated time for it to come back online. We are looking at all of our communications methods. We're looking in particular our social media, because social media has actually been the best way to reach people. We sometimes go through GIS, but we are looking at as early notification, as thorough notification as possible. And to answer the question that most people want to hear, what are you doing and how long is it going to take? So all of that is in what we're trying to do now and our current communications push. But that, as I said, is in respect of pretty much shut-offs that we know about or that we have planned for.
Okay, in terms of follow-up, we know that the situation in Boswell are usually planned shut-offs, because there haven't been leaks. There have been situations where reservoirs haven't been full, and that is the reason why people get a little bit peeved. The final follow-up question in terms of distribution going into the area, I know from Barbados Water Authority and from cabinet meetings as well, the issue of surge protection, and I think Mr. Halliday spoke to it briefly in responding to another question. My question also has to do with timeline. Is there a timeline? Because often the pump at Ashton Hall, that is particularly, I shouldn't say particularly, we know that to be vulnerable to these outages, and we know that it needs surge protection. It needs protection from spikes coming when electricity comes back. And I'm wondering if there's any timeline. I know there are resource issues and constraints, but is there a timeline for getting that pump protected so that we don't get the interruptions that we've been having in Mount Bravata, Rose Hill, Maynards?
This is an issue that we've been highly sensitive to as well, Honourable Minister. And I can confirm that we have ordered surge arresters and lightning rods for all of our pumping facilities, in particularly 42. It's a problem that has plagued us, and we have the board mandated that we deal with it, and we've taken steps to address it. In terms of a particular timeline, I see no reason why over the next 3 months we cannot get this fully in place. But it's more than that, because in addition to the surge arresters and the lightning rods in events of for emergency events, we've recognized that the Barbados Water Authority has to reduce its dependence on electrical supply. And already we're currently finishing the installation of 3 generators, and we have another 8 on order. And following that, as resources permit, because it's a critical issue that we must look at, we're going to continue each month after month to order more and more generators until we are satisfied that we have an adequate provision for protection for the various facilities that we have in mind. In that regard, we've also been having a number of discussions with Light and Power to see how best we can improve those situations as well. So where timeline is concerned, certainly over the next 3 months, we should have those surge arresters in place. By the end of March, we should have 3 generators up and running in 3 critical areas, Newcastle, unfortunately not necessarily up north at the moment. And over the next year, and certainly by September, we estimate, we will have a number of other generators in place that will also protect the areas that you have identified. You're absolutely correct. Ashton Hall is one of those areas that is subjected to whatever direction the wind blows. It only has to blow 2 kilometers an hour in one direction, and that pump is gone. We know that. And as a matter of fact, we have changed that shroud pump to what we'll call a normal pump, because the shore pumps have proven themselves not to be as reliable. So that is the first thing that we've done, but we monitor it very closely. But we know until we have a measure of protection in place through generator and source protection, we have to continue to manage that very carefully.
Sorry.
Madam Chair, just to further supplement that answer, and to just remind members that there's another part to the ministry. The Barbados Water Authority is in the process of becoming self-sufficient. Our aim is to be able to power all of our plants from renewable energy. We've started with solar installations at some of the plants, but the aim is to have all of the plants and pumping stations powered by renewable energy, so we are off the grid where that is concerned, and actually selling electricity back to the grid as another source of income for the Barbados Water Authority. Our belief and our plan is to remove ourselves from the variables that are introduced by the utility in terms of the outages and the surges, and to control our generation of electricity ourselves.
Thank you.
I just wanted to...
You had your supplementals. You want to say thanks?
Yes, I just want to say thanks to Barbados Water Authority in particular. We've given them a lot of lashes, but in recent times, we've been getting good cooperation. And I want to thank Mr. Halliday and the chair and the other members. And just to remind them that social media and all those other things are fine. The old people in St. Peter listen to 100.7. So to get to them, you know, and they're not receiving the WhatsApps from my personal assistant.
Thank you.
So
Honourable
have to
member
get
for
them.
St. John.
Chair, the honourable member from St. Peter provided a good segue, because I'm seeking cooperation too. Minister, you spoke about trying to help out householders and for the betterment of all Barbados. I have some constituents who are living at Venture, St. John, Clifton Hall, Zors, Sargent Street, which are all recognized tenantries. I also have some individuals living at Bath and Welch Village, Krongland. Now, the reality is that these individuals were living at these locations for more than 20 years. And my question to you is, why is it that in most professions you have the grandfather clause? Why is it that the ministry cannot identify a period of time to provide water supply to these particular individuals within the constituency of St. John? Now, we have a situation, particularly at Zors, where the landowner or who they were paying rent to died maybe 20 years ago. And these people were living there all of their lives. And I'm thinking that the laws of natural justice should dictate that the ministry should come up with a number of years, 10, 15, because they have been there that long, to provide a water supply to these individuals in St. John. Similar to what the member for St. Peter said, this is a vexing situation that persons in 2019 cannot get a water supply, because every time they apply to your ministry, they're being told, we need to see ownership. And it is not there. So my question, how can this particular problem be fixed?
Madam Chair, that is, and member, that is a very important question. It affects not just you and your constituents and the member for St. Joseph and his constituents. It affects me and my constituents. And I have gotten so many calls from other MPs about people. It probably happens in every single constituency in Barbados. The peculiar thing about water arrears attach to the title to land. So they go with the land. So one of the things that you have to be able to satisfy when you are selling land, satisfy a purchaser, is that the water rates have been paid. Because nobody is going to buy a piece of land with outstanding water rates, because you then inherit the debt. So what has happened, because water runs with the title to the land, it is illegal to connect somebody to water if that person does not have the express written permission of the title holder, because you're effectively putting somebody in a position where they can create a charge on somebody else's land potentially without their knowledge. I accept that the situation causes injustices sometimes. I accept that you have situations where somebody dies and the estate has not been dealt with, and for some reason, if the water supply was not disconnected, then you have no problem. But for any time it becomes disconnected, you have to put it back on, and the person who holds the title is dead or unavailable, you can't get it back on again. You have situations where people have been living on land and who are, technically speaking, under the laws of Barbados, entitled to ownership of that, because if you live on land and you get rights by adverse possession, if you've been living on a piece of land and treating it as yours, use it as a right for over 10 years, then you can actually apply to the court and get a deed saying that you're the owner of the land. So there's situations created when people are entitled to have a legal right conveyed to them, but they don't yet have it in hand, and so the water is not connected. I shouldn't speak about what happens in cabinet. What I will tell you is that in line with all of the water papers that we're doing, the water rezoning policy, some other papers and amendments to legislation are coming, one of the things that we are looking at and intend to bring in as short a time as possible. We attempted to before, for one reason or the another, we had to pull that one back. You were there. We had to pull that one back. We had to line our ducks up to deal with a number of other things, including the water zoning policy. Once these things have gone through, then we're going at that again, because it is in my best interest to have that sorted out as well. As I'm speaking to you, I'm seeing this particular person's face in front of me, in front of my eyes, that I know will never vote for me again if I don't get that sorted out in a short order. So it is a situation that can be corrected. As it stands now, the Water Authority has no choice because it is against the law. But it's the same thing with Crown land. Crown land is owned by somebody, it's owned by the Crown. So if you get a letter from the ministry, from the National Housing Corporation or somebody, or whoever the title holder of that land is, you can get the water connected to it. But people see Crown land as free land. Crown land has an owner. It is owned by the government of Barbados, so the same rules apply. But we're trying our best to get this anomaly sorted out as quickly as possible, because we realize it causes hardship and as you said, injustice to some people. But there are other constraints, there are other considerations further down the line. It is not just the inconvenience of your constituent not having water or my constituent not having water, but it is also you have people living in a house where they cannot practice proper hygiene, and we put ourselves in a position where it may result in something a lot more serious than an inconvenience. So we at the ministry are well aware of it. We drafted something in relation to it before. We are redrafting with the proper considerations as informed by the Attorney General. The Attorney General and I have spoken, and we've been advised as to what is the best way to go about this to provide some measure of protection to the title holder. The board of the Water Authority has already agreed with us, but as soon as we get the water zoning policy through and some of the other things that we have to do before we get to that, we're going to push that one as a matter of urgency. That one is not something being kicked down the line. That one is there, and as soon as it is possible to do that, we will do that, because I do not want to preside over a ministry and have a statutory corporation under me that is depriving Barbadians of what I see as a basic human right. So that is a foremost concern, not just for the BWA, but also for our ministry. I hope I've given you some comfort.
We'll prefer timelines, but I'm satisfied, Minister. Madam Chair, I have one other question, then I will give way. Your strategic goals, you speak about reducing the electricity consumption.
We can hardly hear you. Just pull the microphone.
Oh, okay.
Thanks.
The strategic goals, reducing the electricity consumption. Now, we have a major problem in Barbados with the youth, with guys on the blocks. And my question is, because I believe, and I'm wondering, the question is if your ministry is looking at it. We have playing fields that are scattered all across the country. And my question is your ministry looking at the possibility of moving to renewable energy in terms of having all of the lights at these particular grounds across Barbados powered by solar energy as opposed to electricity? And the primary reason for the question is because a lot of the guys who would come out at night and play or get involved in sports cannot afford the $10 to go to Sports Council to buy a token that will last for an hour or so. But if there's a case that your ministry is working on a project that will provide electricity to the playing field and the hard courts using renewable energy, I think it is a win-win situation for everybody. Is there such a project?
No, there is no such project in process at the moment. This is something that we have discussed. There's a small grants facility that I would have spoken with in relation to doing a project on the Silver Sands playing field to provide solar powered bleachers and hopefully to power the lights. But this is something that I was looking at privately as the MP for Christchurch East. But there's no active project within the ministry. It is something we have discussed, but it is something equally that will cost money. And so unless we can find, we will look for funding for it, but unless we can find funding for it, then it will be difficult for us to do it. I have spoken to Minister King about it, and he has undertaken to work with me to try to find some funding that will cover both sports and renewable energy for us to get this here done. So it is something that we have discussed within the ministry. It's something that I have dealt with personally as an MP. It is something I've discussed with the minister responsible for sports, and we're looking to do it once we find an avenue to do it because it costs money. But no, we do not have an active program dealing with that at the moment.
Okay. Madam Chair, can I ask a final question?
I know it's not related, but go ahead.
I'm sure it's probably being done, but I saw in the papers that there's a drought coming. From traveling in the area, I realized that there are wells at Redland. But we have millions of gallons of water running into the sea in St. John coming from Codrington College and that whole area. I mean, is there any plans, or maybe, like I said, you're already tapping that water, but if not, are there any plans to sink a well at the location, Bath Codrington College, to deal with some of the water that is just running into the sea? Thank you, Madam Chair.
We recognize that the situation that the MP is talking about is one that we have to look at more urgently. At Bath, we are actually at Codrington College. We have a spring source that we use for public supply. And we recognize that with climate change, you're going to have more intense and short duration storms, which will mean that we'll be generating more runoff. So going forward, the Water Authority is looking at locations where we could capture some of that water and use. The location at Bath where we're talking at is in a location where it would not be economic to dig a well because the yield would be very, very small. The coral cover in that location is very, very thin. But talking about stormwater, we are collaborating with other agencies. For example, the Ministry of Transport and Works, through their drainage unit, we have collaborated with them to try and identify locations where we could capture the water and induce it to go into the ground so that we could pump the water out. So MTW constructed a check dam at Sailor Gully they constructed 2 check dams in the gully behind St. Thomas Church, which has minimized flooding into Sunset Crest, because Sunset Crest is actually in the mouth of the gully. Additionally, we have collaborated with C.O. Williams, just east of Highway 2A by Port Vale Sugar Factory. There are 2 gullies, one coming from Police Spring and one coming from Danscombe, where the 2 meet. Williams was allowed to excavate there and create a depression. And because of that, it has minimized the flooding into Ho Town. So there are a number of projects that we will be working with. It is not only the Water Authority, in collaboration with other agencies, that will capture some of that surface runoff.
But just, Madam Chair, to further. Madam Chair, to further supplement that answer, it is not everywhere that you see a spring or a stream running that you can dam it, because we have to be very aware when we're trying to harvest water of what happens downstream. There are certain ecosystems that are dependent on those streams. There are certain things that happen downstream that are occasioned or informed by the fact that water flows down. So if we look at blocking, we can't just dam and collect everywhere that we see water running, because it may cause more significant environmental and ecological damage down the line. So before we look to dam an area or try to control the water flow, we have to do a study to see the impact on the environment and the impact on the ecosystems that depend on that water, and then make an informed decision. But I take the point because somebody else today actually sent me a WhatsApp in relation to that same matter. So I hope that they're listening.
Thank you. Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I want to take the Minister offshore this time. You would be aware that Trinidad has a tremendous oil and gas industry and has had that for years. In fact, they have multiple offshore exploration platforms. And I had the opportunity to visit a couple of them a few years ago. I believe Mr. Scanterbury may have been in that group as well. I'm not sure. Yes, he was. And my question then would be, you also are aware that Guyana has made significant finds in their exploration for their offshore bid blocks as well. And I know that the previous Barbados Labour Party administration put in place the bid blocks. And I think we've had 1 or 2 people who actually were given some bid blocks. But over the last 10 years, nothing has been done with those bid blocks. And I'd like to know, what are your ministry's plans with the bid blocks, and where exactly are we with the bid blocks, knowing full well that 2 of our neighbors have had very successful finds, to the point that Guyana is now booming and is expected to grow at 20 to 21% of their GDP because of the finds of oil and gas offshore.
Madam Chair, honorable members, Jamar White, Director of Natural Resources in the Ministry of Energy. With respect to your question, I'd like to clarify that we have been doing a number of things in relation to the offshore. We recognize the developments in neighboring Trinidad and Guyana. For point of clarification, Guyana has been actually in the offshore before us. They had a number of issues that stopped them from progressing due to boundary issues and other matters. However, we would have signed some licenses with the international company, BHP Billiton, and since that time we've been engaged in some very robust negotiations with the company in respect of the offshore. Those negotiations have centered around the matter of the environment, conducting environmental impact assessments, and also the terms and conditions of the licenses, which we fought hard to ensure that we preserve the interests of the country. What we've done, since we've signed the licenses, we've been engaged in discussions.
Signed 10 years ago, wasn't it? Signed?
No, the licenses were awarded in 2008. The licenses were actually signed in 2015. Now, what we've done since the licenses have been signed is that the company has then been required to prepare and submit an environmental impact assessment in respect of the offshore. Now, that environmental impact assessment looks at the impacts of various offshore operations, including seismic acquisition, sampling, and drilling. And we had to ensure, because of the importance of our coastal and marine environment to the country, not only for tourism, but fisheries, international shipping, even for the benefit of Barbadians for recreational purposes, that we encouraged the company to prepare an EIA that was specific to Barbados, that addressed the concerns that were critical to our country in respect of our offshore and maritime space. So the company would have submitted that initial EIA following the signature of the licenses in 2015. We established an EIA committee which evaluated those EIAs in respect of the 2 offshore blocks, and we highlighted a number of shortcomings in those EIAs. We've since communicated that to the company. They've addressed those shortcomings through the submission of a revised EIA, which we've also reviewed, and we have now scheduled final consultations with the company during this month of March to iron out the last outstanding issues in relation to the EIAs. With that said, once that process is completed, we will make recommendations to the Ministry of the Environment, who under the legislation is required to approve the EIA. And once that is approved, offshore exploration activities can begin in earnest offshore Barbados. So we've been given a very firm message to get this process completed, with the understanding that it has taken quite a long time because of the robustness of the negotiations and because of our steadfast position where we want to ensure that we preserve our coastal and marine space in light of oil spills that have been going on around the world and other places. In addition to that, we've also, along with the work we've done with BHP Billiton, we conducted an additional licensing campaign in 2015, through which we licensed an additional block. So stuff has been happening over the last 10 years. We've licensed an additional block to a Spanish company called Repsol, and we are actually engaged in negotiations with the company regarding the drafting of an exploration license for that offshore block, as well as the preparation of an EIA for that block. And we also have consultations scheduled with that company during this month of March to advance that process. So a number of things have still been going on behind the scenes to push our offshore acreage and get to a point where we can realize our offshore petroleum potential, and doing that in a responsible and careful way, rather than trying to push in a rush.
Minister, I would submit that from 2008 to start the process to 2019 and nothing had happened appropriately to start is a long, long, long time. And you have to move with alacrity to get these things done. And I would expect that when you come back next year, because I have no doubt you're going to be in the well again, that you'll be able to come and say that you're much, much further along, and you've been able to do a lot more than was done by the last administration in 10 years, which really did little to nothing with respect to the bid blocks. I want to get to the second part, still related to natural gas, and I hear all of my colleagues say that their constituents sent them. Well, my constituents sent me to find out where and when your expansion program for natural gas is going to happen throughout the constituencies of Barbados, but in particularly in Christchurch West. You would recall that I was the chairman of the National Petroleum Corporation for 5 years, and at that time we added 5,000, in fact Mr. Scantlebury would well remember that we added 5,000 new subscribers to the natural gas grid over the 5 years that I was there. And I want to know, what expansion program does the ministry have, and in particular the MPC have, to be able to add additional subscribers to the grid for National Petroleum Corporation?
Good evening, Madam Chair. My name is Mr. Scantlebury. I'm the Acting General Manager of the National Petroleum Corporation. I acknowledge our minister, who was a former chairman of the National Petroleum Corporation. We had done very well over the last years when our chairman was on board. However, within recent times, we have encountered financial constraints. However, we continue to work with the Ministry of MTW when they're doing their infrastructure. We normally work with them and we put in the gas. The latest project was Flagstaff Road. Currently, the National Petroleum have 22,000 customers, of which 750 are commercial customers, and we look forward to working again with this new dispensation in increasing our natural gas. We have some projects on board. We will shortly be doing Sam Lawrence Castle. We have that project to hook up gas at Sam Lawrence Castle. And we have a number of small projects ongoing. We are looking at work in the city, which might be started soon. Also, we are looking to do some work in Christchurch. And specific to Christchurch West, we don't have anything planned for that right now, but from time to time, we get petitions from various constituencies, and what the corporation does, we go and do a survey, then we come back and we do an estimate, and then based on the viability of the project, then we would start a project. And we continue, that is our mode of operation, and we will continue along those lines. But the main thing is that we have been constrained by finances.
My final follow-up, Madam Chair, and I guess this will be to the Minister and also I guess to Mrs. Canterbury again, or maybe to the Chairman of the MPC. Now, we at MTW, and I'm glad that you were able to recognize that your former Chairman is now the Minister of MTW, and therefore I'm using that position to help the corporation constantly, and wherever we're doing roads that you can put natural gas in, we're inviting you to come and do that, because at the end of the day it is for the people of Barbados. It's their gas. My question is about the mains replacement that you are about to embark on, and maybe I'll give the Minister an opportunity to inform people of Barbados that of this mains replacement that the MPC is going to do along Highway 7 in particular. And why I say that is because Mr. Canterbury might not be aware, but Highway 7, a big part of it goes through the same Christchurch West that he said you did not have any programs for. And there might be some people that could benefit as you do the mains replacements that would also be able to get some natural gas coming to their area. But you want to give us some information about the mains replacement for Highway 7 going down to the Arch?
Yes, Minister, the National Petroleum Corporation has signed a loan with the IDB, and part of that program is main replacements, mainly in the Christchurch area and Bridgetown area. As the General Manager of the Water Authority said, they have some very old mains, and the same applies to MPC. We were previously Natural Gas Corporation, which was incorporated in 1955. Previous to that, there was another company. So we have gas that is supplied by old cast iron mains. We had it through the gullies coming from Greg Farm. We have done most of that replacement where we took out the mains from the gully and run a main from Orange Hill up to Greg Farm. But we still have some pipes in the Christchurch area, the South Coast, and in Bridgetown. And these are cast iron mains, and they leak at the heads. So this IED program that we have signed, we will replace those mains. The approximate cost is about $8 million, and we are hoping to start that at the beginning of January 2020.
Yeah, just to follow, because I know I don't have a final question, but just the reason that people go to the MTW all the time saying that Highway 7 has not been done is because we have to wait till the natural gas is sorted. So this is why the two ministries are important, because it is your ministry getting your project completed before then the MTW can complete their side, which is replacing Highway 7. But go ahead, Minister. Thank you.
Madam Chair, just by way of an explanation, because it is important that coming out of this, people understand the reasons why things are done or why they're not done. A lot of people ask, why can you not send natural gas to my area? You stopped at this junction. I live a mile down the road where you couldn't pipe it up to me. To connect somebody to an existing natural gas line, it costs about $1,150, right? That's a simple connection. But the cost of digging the road, laying the pipe that would take the natural gas has a further, much higher cost. So what has happened? The natural gas in Barbados is heavily subsidized. The natural gas company does not really make a profit. The price we sell the gas at locally is below the price that we import the gas to supplement the local amounts, the local supply with. So what the natural gas company, what MPC has done, they have a business model where if you're setting up a business that requires natural gas, a business or a hotel, a restaurant or something, and you request a natural gas service, you effectively pay for the installation of the pipes up to your business, and then the people along that pipeline get the side benefit of being able to be connected to the natural gas cheaply. So the commercial customer effectively bears the cost of getting the pipe from where it last was or where it ended to his business, and everybody along that pipeline now gets the cheap connection or the cheap hookup to the natural gas as a consequence. Right. So, Madam Chair, it is important that people understand if a community wants or a development wants natural gas installed in that development, and they're willing to pay the cost of installing all the infrastructure to get it that development, the NPC is more than happy to make that connection. But invariably, people do not want to take that or bear that burden. So where we expand the pipeline is where there's a commercial reason for doing so and somebody else is paying for it, and those along will be able to benefit from the fact that the pipe is being run in front of them in any event. So that would just explain to people sometimes why when you stop, we can't go any further until a big project comes up that requires you to go further, and then everybody along that line will get an ancillary benefit.
Madam Chair, I beg to now move that you do report progress to His Honor the Speaker and ask for leave to sit again.
Question is that I do not report to the Honorable Speaker progress and ask for leave to sit again. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All honorable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported progress and humbly requests leave to sit again.
Your Honor, I beg to move that this House be suspended until 6:25.
The question is that the Honorable Chamber be suspended until 6:25 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber is suspended until 6:25 p.m.